Chapter 281, Loctus. I'm okay again, Hogwarts. Office of Advanced Charm Theory and Practice. The room was dim, lit only by the cold flame of a silver candelabra. Towering bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with arcane tomes and the occasional muggle book. Slytherin's locket lay on the desk, its metal glinting ominously in the pale light. Sagres stood at the desk and raised his wand. Open. The clasp clicked, the lid sprang, and a hiss of icy magic filled the room, making the candlelight gutter. A blurred, distorted shadow struggled free from the locket. I told you you'd regret it. Lord Voldemort's voice carried amusement. Sagres gave it no quarter. He pierced the fragment's mind with legilimency like a bed of invisible thorns. Images rushed into his head, fanatic worship, ecstasy and killing, an obsession with immortality, raw fear of death. But when he pushed for anything concrete about other Horcruxes, he met an impenetrable glacial wall. The soul fragment sneered, contemptuous and triumphant. Legilimency? Trying to peer into my thoughts? Foolish fellow, did you think I'd be unprepared? Sagres frowned and withdrew his magic. He had expected resistance, but the defenses were far stronger than usual. Riddle had clearly made protecting his thoughts a priority when he forged this Horcrux. It was also possible the fragment had been deliberately scrubbed of clues to the others. From what Sagres knew of Voldemort, arrogant and conceited, certainly talented and cautious in his own way, forcing a breakthrough wasn't impossible, but it would risk shattering the fragment entirely. That outcome was not acceptable, at least not now. It seems you understand, the fragment taunted, voice slick with triumph. You cannot seize knowledge you are unworthy of, but perhaps we can bargain. Give me something, and I'll give you something in return. Your paranoia has made the strongest prison for yourself, Sagres said evenly. The fragment's laugh turned shrill. Ha! Fear! Submit! The Dark Lord is immortal. A flash of impatience crossed Sagres' face. Close. The lid slammed shut with a snap, sealing the clamoring soul back inside. The pressure in the office eased, only the cold flame crackled on. Sagres watched the locket and found his finger tapping the desk almost of its own accord. A frontal assault on the memories wouldn't work. He would need another approach. He slipped the locket into his robe, and his gaze fell on the book on the desk, Bloodline Grafting and Purification, a text he'd borrowed from Sirius. It was one of the few volumes from deep in the House of Black library that had truly interested him, obscure, ethically dubious, but full of intriguing hypotheses. If direct access to the other Horcruxes was closed, he could change tactics. He opened the book. Its pages filled with ancient runes, cryptic diagrams, and dangerous treatises on transferring, fusing, and enhancing magical strength from various creatures. Some ideas resonated with his own studies of magic's essence. Others offered entirely new avenues. He beckoned to Loquetus, who had been dozing on the windowsill. The raven flew over and settled on the desk. It's time for you to do your part, Sagres murmured, stroking the raven's sleek feathers. The next day, he set up a small alchemical circle in a corner of the office. Following the book's obscure instructions, he attempted to graft a feather taken from an augury, that faintly prophetic trait, into Loquetus's wing root using a complex blend of alchemy and magical guidance. It was not a smooth process. The book was vague where precision mattered, and the grafting stumbled and failed several times. Collapsed circuits spat sparks into the air. The raven cried out in pain. A few feathers singed. Fortunately, the bird's black plumage hid the damage. Sagres recorded every failure without expression, adjusted runes and incantations, and tried again. For him, a little pain was a trivial price to pay in pursuit of knowledge, especially when he didn't have to pay it himself. Loquetus endured much, and in its odd way it did not seem to mind. If anything, it tolerated the torment. After several days of adjustments, the final rune burned steady and faded into the raven's skin. Loquetus gave a thin, ethereal cry and tilted its head as if listening to something far off. Sagres hadn't expected success so soon. The augury feather's weak, simple traits had made the graft easier. But the core principles in bloodline grafting and purification had been validated, at least in outline. A few days later, the Bronze Feather meeting convened, the first since Lupin had left Hogwarts. As Sagres went through the usual inquiries about what everyone had been doing, most eyes turned to Lupin when he took his seat. He looked leaner than at school, The fatigue of long outdoor watches etched into his features, but his eyes were bright and he seemed in good spirits. I tracked a dark wizard selling illegal potions in Nocturne Alley, Lupin said. His destination surprised me. Not an underground bar or a ruin, but a remote highland in northern Scotland. He paused, organizing his thoughts. I watched him for 3 days. It's a temporary camp for a werewolf pack. They're on high alert. I couldn't get close enough for more details without exposing myself, he continued. But they're vicious. I recognized at least 2 faces, wanted criminals on the ministry's list, responsible for multiple attacks on muggles and wizards. They appear to be planning something, and the camp is ringed with alarms and sentries. Sagres listened, tapping the table once. Very valuable intelligence. Well done. He acknowledged the risk Lupin had taken, and then asked about another matter. How effective was the wolfsbane potion Nightingale provided? Excellent. Lupin smiled, looking relieved. I expected wolfsbane to be unpleasant at best, but I didn't expect such a huge difference. He'd only ever had the wolfsbane brewed for him by Professor Snape, so he didn't know what ordinary wolfsbane tasted like. Sagres smiled. Professor Snape seems to have put real effort into making it even more unpalatable while keeping it effective. A few suppressed chuckles rippled around the table. Lupin shook his head, a helpless little smile easing the atmosphere. Chapter 282, Turbulence. Let's get back to business. Sagres' gaze swept over everyone in the room. I'm announcing a task. Obtain live specimens or biological samples of certain magical creatures for a magical research project. He spoke clearly. Priority targets, alchemy and swooping evil. The shape-shifting and spatial displacement properties of those species were invaluable to his bloodline grafting research. If you have leads, contact me directly. He paused. But remember, safety first. I don't want anyone turning up on the front page because of a few magical animals, or worse. He tapped his wand lightly, and several parchments flickered into being, hovering before each person. Also, his voice deepened, the magical world is likely to fall into turmoil soon. To meet potential threats, I suggest you all learn some powerful offensive and defensive magic as soon as possible. They took the parchments. Detailed spell descriptions and casting requirements had already appeared. Someone frowned. Turmoil? What exactly do you mean? Lord Voldemort, Sagres said, cold, has regained his body. He is probably traveling across the continent now, but no one can predict where he will strike next. Faces grew serious at the news. He's returned? Robin asked, disbelief in his voice. What does he want? Terrorists don't need grand motives, Sagres replied. His vision is narrow, his aims limited, but the damage he can inflict shouldn't be underestimated. A heavy silence followed. Someone asked the obvious question in a small voice. If we run into Death Eaters in the future, or even him personally, kill them, Sagres answered without hesitation. They are parasites feeding on the body of magical society, spreading fear, choking the future, and only hindering the progress of the magical world. The bluntness of his reply left the table tense. Kestrel tightened her fingers around the parchment. Her voice lost its usual lightness. So, the turmoil has already begun. The prophecy is starting to come true. Yes, Sagres' reply was decisive. It has begun. Improving your ability to protect yourselves and defeat enemies is not a suggestion, it's a necessity. Nightingale traced the parchment with her fingertips and nodded. We'll learn useful magic immediately. I can also prepare strong healing potions and various auxiliaries for contingencies. Good, Sagres approved. Better safe than sorry. Then I'll strengthen monitoring of the International Flu Network, Robin offered. If you know who and his followers try to use official channels for large movements, I should be able to spot anomalies early. Thunderbird added quickly, I'll advise the North American Magical Congress to raise its alert level. I'll also use my contacts to watch for dark arts activity and any powerful, unaccounted-for wizards crossing borders. Remain vigilant, but don't actively alarm the public, Sagres said. If you discover Voldemort's whereabouts, inform me at once. His tone was plain, but carried absolute confidence. In his eyes, Voldemort was no longer an unstoppable Dark Lord, but an object already claimed. If there are no further questions, this meeting is adjourned. He waved, and the members stood, using their badges to leave the safe house. They were more solemn than when they had arrived. The parchments and Sargeras's announcement felt like a heavy stone, but also ignited a long-dormant urgency. The magical world was on the brink. Sargeras returned to his office. Loyalties had been avoiding him for 2 days. He had pretended not to notice. Once the alchemy and swooping evil were secured, her vacation would be over. The alchemy's magical traits were key to optimizing the Raven bloodline. If analyzed correctly, Loyalties would be able to alter her size at will, and her combat ability would jump a level. The swooping evil's spatial jumping ability could, if integrated, allow Loyalties to apparate and vastly improve message delivery efficiency. He was thinking about retrieving the alchemy from the dueling arena when a gentle knock sounded at his office door. Sargeras frowned. Unexpected visitors rarely disturbed him at that hour. He waved his wand and the door opened soundlessly. Professor Snape stood in the doorway, black robes more somber than the evening, his face as pale and gloomy as ever. "Sargeras," Snape said in that low, smooth whisper, "I hope I'm not interrupting your contemplation." "Professor Snape," Sargeras replied coolly. "What do you need?" Snape glided in slowly, his gaze casually sweeping the office before lingering for a moment on the bloody alchemical array in the corner. "Headmaster Dumbledore asked me to tell you," he said emotionlessly, "that he has noticed your interest in certain specialized areas of research. He cautions that once certain boundaries are crossed, the consequences may far exceed expectations." It was a polite warning from Dumbledore, conveyed through Snape, no doubt referencing Sargeras's refusal to surrender the Horcrux and other dangerous experiments. Sargeras allowed a faint, almost mocking smile. "Please thank the headmaster for his concern," he said, "and tell him I know what I'm doing and what the cost may be. I don't seek to destroy the world. I seek to understand it and shape it according to my will." Snape's dark eyes fixed on him. "I hope that is the case. History is full of those who believed they could control dangerous powers, only to be consumed by them. I am not them, and they are not me." Sargeras's reply was brief and arrogant. Snape inclined his head and moved toward the door. As he reached it, he paused, as if recalling something. He did not turn back, but his voice remained low. "Additionally, Potter and his friends tend to become excessively curious about things they shouldn't know. If you have any special items here that need safeguarding, ensure they are absolutely secure. Gryffindor curiosity can cause unimaginable trouble." Then he glided out like a large bat, and the door closed softly behind him. Sargeras watched the door for a moment, his expression darkening. Snape's words carried a subtext. Did Snape know about the Horcrux? Or was this merely a general caution about meddlesome young wizards? It didn't matter. He would not hand the Horcrux to Dumbledore. But Professor Snape had been surprisingly human today. 283. Quidditch World Cup. Hogwarts Castle felt empty and silent at the end of summer. Sargeras politely declined yet another Quidditch World Cup invitation delivered by Owl. This one came from an official in the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Games and Sports, worded respectfully and hinting that it would be a good opportunity to meet influential people. He had no interest. Chasing a metal ball through the air to the roar of thousands felt noisy and meaningless to him. He would rather be doing the grafting experiments he planned, or contemplating how to safely unlock the secrets of a Horcrux. His reply was polite but firm. He declined all invitations, including Harry's and Sirius's, explaining that important magical research was at a critical stage and he could not be distracted. The Quidditch World Cup venue sat on a vast, flat highland. An early summer wind swept across the grass, carrying the distant clamor of crowds and faint cheers. Next to the entrance stood a small stone house, the only Muggle residence in the area. Mr. Roberts, the homeowner, stood in the doorway, staring at a cluster of tents that seemed to have sprung up overnight on the gentle slope, his expression dazed and uneasy. Never seen so many people," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over the misty campsite. "I can't believe it. Hundreds of tents appeared overnight, and people are still arriving." "Is there a problem?" Mr. Weasley asked. He had come to rent a tent, and his tone barely concealed his curiosity. "Problem?" Robert seemed to be reminded of something. "Of course there's a problem. People from all over the world have come. Not just foreigners, but odd people, you understand? Some are actually walking around in pleated skirts and South American cloaks." Is there anything wrong with that? Weasley asked a little nervously. It just feels like I can't quite put my finger on it, like they've escaped from a mental asylum. Mr. Roberts lowered his voice. Mental asylum? Mr. Weasley repeated, clearly intrigued by the unfamiliar Muggle phrase. Mr. Roberts shook his head. I mean, they all seem to know each other. It's like a patient support group meeting. Patient support group meeting, Mr. Weasley echoed, still puzzled. Just then a wizard in knickerbockers suddenly descended from the sky and landed by the door of the stone house. Obliviate, he said, and raised his wand at Mr. Roberts. The man's eyes glazed over, the deep furrows of worry relaxing into a bewildered but peaceful expression, as if nothing had just happened. Arthur, don't chat too much with this muggle, the wizard sighed. I've had to cast the memory charm on him 3 times today. The tent is over there. Go get it. Oh, all right, thank you, Weber. Mr. Weasley took a bundle of tent fabric and poles and called Harry, Hermione, and his children to hurry along. They had only walked a few steps beyond the stone house when another argument caught their attention. Just be a good sport, Archie. Put it on. You can't walk around like that. That muggle by the entrance is already starting to get suspicious. But these silk stockings are authentic muggle goods. An old wizard with white hair tugged defiantly at the bright stockings on his legs. I bought them in London, in a proper muggle shop. Muggles wear these too. Muggle women wear them, Archie. Men don't. Men should wear these, the ministry official pleaded, waving a pair of pinstriped trousers. I'm not wearing them. Old Archie crossed his arms and huffed, letting the breeze ruffle his not-so-flattering hem. I like to let the healthy breeze blow on my backside. Thank you for your concern. Hermione could not hold it in any longer. She bent over, covering her mouth, and let out uncontrollable laughter, her shoulders shaking. Ron grinned foolishly beside her, and Harry lowered his head, pressing his lips together to avoid laughing aloud. After a long while, the 3 of them managed to compose themselves, wiping tears of mirth from their eyes as they continued to follow the group. A little farther on, a sea of tents, like mushrooms that had suddenly sprouted, spread before them. The outer tents were ordinary enough, but the deeper they went, the stranger and more magical the shelters became. A familiar voice drifted from behind an inconspicuous black tent. Looks like the ministry's secrecy efforts are very thorough, aren't they, Arthur? Sirius Black was leaning lazily against a tent pole in a simple black travel robe, his habitual smile in place. He looked a little tired, but the sparkle in his eyes was bright. Sirius! Harry called in surprise and hurried over. Hey, Harry, how's life been at the Burrow these past few days? Very good. Excellent, actually. You just arrived too, Sirius? Hermione had recovered some composure, though her cheeks were still flushed. Half an hour ago. Sirius straightened, clapped Harry on the shoulder, and smiled at Hermione. Then he turned to Mr. Weasley. I've watched that memory charm specialist run back and forth 3 times already. Honestly, couldn't the ministry think of a smarter plan? Like casting a muggle-repelling charm over the whole area? Mr. Weasley sighed. You know, Sirius, the Department of International Magical Cooperation insists on minimizing muggle attention. Fudge thinks large-scale spellwork would be more noticeable. Yes, because casting the memory charm on the same muggle every hour is so discreet, Sirius said sarcastically, a grin playing on his lips. But speaking of scenes, this reminds me of Quidditch World Cups back in the old days. One year, the Bulgarian supporters turned the entire campsite into a temporary forest with tents hanging from the trees. He gestured toward the horizon. Half an hour ago, the Bulgarians put up a magical dome, and the Irish have turned their tents into a moving patch of shamrocks. I even saw a few Australian wizards flying around on kangaroo-shaped magical devices. He followed the group toward the Weasleys' reserved pitch, his black eyes roaming over the oddly shaped shelters around them. Seems wizarding creativity only increases with time, he observed. Before them, hundreds of tents were packed together, each unique, no 2 alike. These tents had long since ceased to be mere shelters of canvas. They were miniature exhibitions where witches and wizards displayed their tastes and magical skill. Some were plain army green, no doubt bought from Muggle stores, their interiors doubtless expanded many times over. Others were absolute palaces on the move, silk drapes, gold and silver edging, self-contained fountains and delicate gardens, with house elves bustling about. A few defied reason entirely. One looked like an upturned oak tree, smoke curling from its hollow. Another was a stack of transparent floating bubbles with shadowy figures moving inside. One tent was perfectly disguised by a disillusionment charm. To a muggle, it would have been nothing more than an unremarkable mound. "Look at that," Sirius said, pointing to a tent made entirely of shadow, its outline only visible if you looked closely. "That must be Durmstrang. They like that sort of thing." Harry glanced over and nodded. "We saw a few of them last year." The air was a tangle of smells: sizzling meat on grills, the warmth of stews, the sharp, resinous smoke of wandwood fires, exotic spices brought from distant places, and the damp, trodden scent of grass and soil. Children on toy brooms chased each other, shrieking through the narrow paths between tents, nearly toppling a pot of bubbling purple concoction. A little boy, barely 2, squatted outside a pyramid-shaped tent, gleefully waving a wand and poking a slug on the grass. Each jab made the slug puff up until it resembled a small sausage. His mother dashed out, flustered. "How many times have I told you, Kevin? Don't touch your father's wand. Oh, for goodness sake." She stepped on the overinflated slug with a wet splat, then it burst. Long after Harry and the others had moved on, the mother's admonishments drifted back on the air, mingled with the boy's tears. "You squashed it. You squashed the slug." Owls and other strange magical creatures threaded the sky, carrying letters and parcels. Brightly colored enchanted paper cranes flapped in formation. Buzzing toy golden beetles wove between tent flaps, leaving tiny trails of light. It was in this bustling, chaotic camp that Mr. Weasley finally led them to their pitch, and where they ran into the Ministry's official party. Ludo Bagman headed the group, looking as if he'd come straight from a carnival. He wore a yellow and black uniform and bounced about, handshaking, loudly predicting scores and accepting compliments like a moving, noisy decoration. He had arranged the Weasleys' tickets. The box seats were excellent. Beside him stood Barty Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, a study in contrasts. Neat gray suit, hair tidy, the kind of expression that belonged at a war council rather than a festival. He hustled along, issuing brisk orders to Percy, who hovered with a clipboard, pale and nervous. "Make sure the Bulgarian delegation's drinking water is chilled, but quarantine those special yogurts they brought," Crouch was saying. "And recheck the Irish head of magical games and sports welcome for etiquette." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir," Percy chirped, quill scratching as he took notes. His voice was high with excitement and fear. He seemed not to notice his family nearby. Bagman spied them and jollied over. "And black! What a spectacle, eh? Fancy a bet? The betting's through the roof this year." Arthur shook Bagman's hand with a smile. Sirius gave a cool nod. Crouch's gaze flicked past them, giving Arthur a slight formal nod. At Sirius it paused for the barest second, an almost imperceptible look of scrutiny, then moved on. "Weasley," Crouch said stiffly, "about the temporary monitoring points for the International Flu Network. Check the duty roster. There must be at least 2 people on duty at all times tonight." "Of course, Mr. Crouch. I'll check personally." Percy's cheeks flushed. He threw a proud look at his family as if to say, "I am dealing with international affairs now," then hurried away, slightly beaming with self-importance. "Dutiful young man," Crouch commented without warmth, then turned to Bagman. "Bagman, we should inspect the villa's resting area. The Bulgarians complain it isn't natural enough." "Oh, of course, Vila. Very particular, but always a pleasure to behold." Bagman replied with a wink, shook Arthur's hand once more, and trailed off with the other officials. The Weasleys and Harry exchanged looks. Ron made a face in Percy's direction. "International Flu Network duty roster? He really thinks he's something." "Percy takes his work seriously," Arthur said with gentle pride and a hint of helplessness. Fred and George mimicked Percy's nervous, high-pitched voice and fussed over imaginary documents, making Ginny and Hermione laugh. "All right, children, we'll set up the tent," Mr. Weasley said, spreading out the canvas and clapping his hands. "Regulations say no magic, so we'll do it the Muggle way. That ought to be interesting." Bill and Charlie arrived shortly after. They'd apparated, and so hadn't needed the early start. With them, the tent went up quickly, but having no instructions, they discovered they had a few support poles left over when they finished. These must be spares, right? Mr. Weasley asked, turning the extra poles over. They didn't seem to fit anywhere. Perhaps not, Hermione offered tactfully. Well, Mr. Weasley said, looking round at the canvas with genuine admiration, you've got to admit, Muggles manage remarkable things without magic. To make sure the tent wouldn't collapse, Mr. Weasley slipped his wand out discreetly and cast a small reinforcing charm on the shaky pegs. Later, he cheerfully led everyone in building a fire and cooking, and even traded matchboxes with an African wizard in a white robe who was fascinated by Muggle conveniences. As dusk fell, the camp grew louder, not quieter, like a storm about to break. Thousands of witches and wizards poured from their tents in a kaleidoscope of colors and accents. Harry and the Weasleys joined the human river flowing toward the main stadium. Hold on tight, don't get separated, Mr. Weasley called as he pushed ahead, trying to keep everyone together. Sirius took up a place at the rear, making sure no youngsters slipped away. The crowd pressed them forward amid a babble of languages, excited cries, and the hawking vendors' calls. The Quidditch Stadium loomed before them, vast and splendid, like a great nest spun of magic. They threaded the lantern-lit passage and were soon led up to the astonishingly luxurious private box at the top level. Chapter 285, Flash. The box offered an excellent view, overlooking the whole stadium. The deep purple seats were soft and comfortable, and a small table even had panoramic binoculars for hire. The stands were packed with witches and wizards from around the globe. Colorful flags and team emblems blended into a surging sea of faces. Merlin's beard. Ron collapsed into his seat, snatching the binoculars Harry handed him. The view's amazing. They scanned the crowd with the glasses and soon picked out many familiar faces not far away. Professor McGonagall sat nearby in a dark green robe, hair pulled into an immaculate bun. Her face was as stern as ever, but her eyes glinted with a genuine love of the sport. She chatted with other Hogwarts professors and acquaintances from the International Confederation of Wizards, occasionally casting warning looks at overly boisterous students, Hogwarts or no. They saw plenty of Hogwarts students, too. Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan were arguing animatedly. By their hand gestures and lips moving, it seemed to be a debate about whether the Irish Chasers or Bulgaria's Beaters were superior. Neville clutched his chocolate frog card nervously, trailing behind the Longbottoms and trying not to get lost in the crowd. At the entrance to the most luxurious top-level box, Draco Malfoy stood with his father. Lucius Malfoy's platinum hair and cold expression were conspicuous. He conversed in low tones with richly dressed wizards, his arrogance barely masked by an undercurrent of caution. Many faces, however, were unfamiliar. Asian wizards in silks, smiling enigmatically, South Americans in bright feather cloaks, Nordic wizards in heavy dragonhide coats, talking loudly in rough voices. The stadium was a microcosm of the magical world. Different tongues, strange garments, all united by one passion, Quidditch. As the sky darkened, giant enchanted lampposts lit the stadium as bright as day, and the finals atmosphere thickened with electric anticipation. Irish supporters began singing their anthem, green and gold flickered through the stands. Then, with a sudden blackout over the vast circular arena, a hush fell across the 100,000 spectators. A booming, magically amplified voice filled the air. Ludo Bagman. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 422nd Quidditch World Cup Final. Thunderous applause and shouts nearly tore the night apart. And now, allow me to introduce the mascots of the Bulgarian national team, the Vila. A group of breathtakingly beautiful figures appeared on the field. Their skin was pale as moonlight, hair cascading like waterfalls. As they began to dance, a dreamlike hush fell over most of the men in the crowd. Harry felt his worries evaporate. For a moment, his only thought was that he'd do anything for one of those smiles. Ron beside him was half standing, dazed and grinning like an idiot, as if he wanted to leap from the box into the stadium. Not far off, a middle-aged wizard peered through binoculars in an attempt to get a closer look at the Vila, misjudged his balance, tumbled forward and got stuck between the front row seats, legs flailing as he tried to keep watching. Elsewhere, a chorus of men made extravagant proposal gestures. Some conjured a wilted bouquet and waved it toward the field. When the villa finished, the Irish mascots took the stage. With a flash of emerald light, a troop of leprechauns shot out like green comets, forming shamrocks, frothing tankards, and even a mocking face aimed at the villa. Then they showered the audience with galleons, gold coins raining down. It's galleons! Ron finally shook off the villa's spell, screaming as he and the twins dove to scoop coins into their robes. The atmosphere, already electric, hit a new peak, and the players from both sides strode onto the pitch. "Look, it's Victor Krum!" A cry went up, and the crowd surged. Bulgaria's star seeker moved with a grave expression, flanked by teammates, drawing another wave of excitement. After the two captains shook hands, bagmen bellowed the start of the match. The game exploded into motion. The whine of broomsticks, the savage clang of bludgers, bagman's breathless commentary, and the crowd's roar braided together. As an excellent seeker himself, Harry tracked the two seekers closely, especially Victor Krum. He knew Krum was a skilled duelist. Today he saw that Krum was also a national-level Quidditch master. Krum's flying was fierce and unpredictable, diving and twisting at impossible angles, narrowly dodging bludgers time and again, each maneuver eliciting gasps from the stadium. "Look at that feint!" Harry grabbed Ron, eyes shining. "It's magnificent!" "The Ronsky feint!" Ron cried, thrilled. The Irish chasers, by contrast, moved with seamless coordination, scoring so rapidly the scoreboard struggled to keep up. The quaffle threaded hoop after hoop to the accompaniment of Bagman's hoarse, "Another goal!" and the deafening green wave of Irish cheers. The leprechaun formation drifted like a bursting green and gold nebula, scattering coins and delight across the stands. Across the way, even a glimpse of the villa sent whole sections of men into a daze, hollering foolishly. "Over here! Over here!" Ron sang at the villa, face flushed with excitement. Despite Victor Krum's fierce, gravity-defying dive to catch the golden snitch, the Irish team won by a narrow margin of 10 points. The chasers' superiority had been decisive. Catching the snitch had come too late to change the outcome. As green and gold ribbons filled the air and Irish fans celebrated wildly, a faint, muffled sob came from the corner of Harry's box. Harry, Ron, and Hermione all turned. Huddled in the darkest corner on a small stool that looked as though it had been squeezed in just for her, sat a tiny figure they hadn't noticed before, a house elf. She wore a dirty, patched pillowcase with a faded Hogwarts crest. Her round eyes bulged with tears that streamed down her long nose and dripped onto thin knees. Her bat-like ears hung limply, and her whole body trembled with suppressed sobs. "Oh, my goodness." Hermione was the first to speak, voice soft with sympathy. "Are you all right?" The elf flinched at Hermione's voice, looking up in sudden fear as if she'd been scolded. She blew her nose loudly into a corner of the pillowcase and sniffled. Winky's fine," she stammered in a high, trembling voice, forcing a smile that fell flat. "Winky's just sad for Mr. Krum. He tried so hard, but he lost." Ron blinked, distracted from his post-match excitement. "You're sad for Krum? Well, it was a shame, but what a match." Winky's shoulders shrank at Ron's louder tone, and the tears flowed harder. "Yes, sir. The match was exciting. Mr. Krum caught the snitch, but they still lost. It's so sad. Winky's master, Mr. Barty Crouch, he'll be very disappointed." Harry's brow tightened at the name. He remembered the meticulous man from earlier. Before he could say anything, a curt, impatient voice called from the direction of the top-level box. "Winky!" Winky's crying stopped so abruptly it was like a snapped string. She straightened, eyes wide and submissive. Chapter 286, Riot. The final whistle blew, and the Ireland supporters' deafening cheers swept through the stadium like a tide. Green and gold ribbons and smoke magically erupted from every corner of the stands, painting the night sky in celebration. "We won! Ireland won!" Ron shouted, slapping Harry on the back, his face flushed from excitement and from hours of shouting. Irish leprechauns danced through the crowd, scattering gold coins, and Ludo Bagman loudly proclaimed Ireland's victory. After a time of revelry, the crowd began to move, but the exit was slower and more congested than the entry. The air smelled of gunpowder and fireworks, threaded with a dozen different kinds of exhilaration. Harry and his friends made their way out with the crowd, running into countless acquaintances along the way. "Harry, Ron, Hermione." Seamus Finnegan squeezed through, his cheeks painted with green shamrocks. "Did you see that? The scoring was insane." Crumb caught the snitch and still lost, Dean Thomas said, incredulous. They even bumped into a few Durmstrang students they'd seen at Hogwarts last year, still in heavy fur cloaks that looked odd in the humid summer air, though their expressions were warmer than at school. One tall boy gave the twins a stiff nod and, in heavily accented English, said the match was intense. It surprised the group, but the Durmstrang students must have remembered the twins' antics, especially their run-in with Peeves in the Great Hall. More strikingly, in front of a stall selling French pastries, they ran into several Beauxbatons girls, including Fleur Delacour, who had tied for second place with Cedric in the Tree Wizard tournament. She recognized them, curtsied gracefully, and smiled. "Good evening. A wonderful match, wasn't it?" Her eyes kept flicking toward Bill, as if she were curious about him. A group of younger Beauxbaton students followed slowly behind her. Although conversation between them wasn't smooth, Harry felt they were much more animated than when he'd seen them at school. By the time they returned to the campsite, night had fully fallen, but the festivities showed no sign of stopping. Wizards from all over the world gathered spontaneously, sharing food, drink, and every exciting moment of the game. Songs, laughter, and conversations in dozens of languages echoed between the tents. Magic produced all sorts of curious effects. Wine bottles played jazz on their own, bonfires spewed rainbow-colored bubbles, and a cluster of flying knives busied themselves slicing sausages, occasionally offering a small piece to a passerby with a pirouette. Mr. Weasley watched all this with a delighted grin, showing a pouch of Muggle lighters to a few Eastern European wizards who were exclaiming in broken English. "You see," he said, demonstrating, "just a light press, and fire comes out, no spell needed, no magic either." The tiny flame danced on the tip of his spectacles. Bill and Charlie chatted with old classmates nearby. Sirius reclined against a magically softened cushion, butterbeer in hand, and with a lazy flick of his wand produced several glowing pillows for everyone to sit on. "What position did you play at school, Sirius?" Ginny asked. "Chaser," he said. His eyes lit up, and with another casual flick, 3 shimmering points of light darted across the air, tracing a Quaffle's path. "James was our seeker. We used to sneak out at night to practice. Never got caught by Filch once." He winked at Harry. "You and your father both have talent. I wouldn't say you're any worse than Crumb. He flies very well, though." As the night deepened, Sirius conjured several floating pumpkin lanterns, whose warm glow lit their small circle. He pulled out packets of Honeyduke's newest exploding bonbons and handed them around, giving a special warning to the twins. "Be careful," he said. "George, Fred, if you're going to use these for pranks, watch the dosage." "Of course, Sirius. We'll be careful," they promised. They sat around the fire, sharing treats bought from the stalls and rehashing every moment of the match until their eyelids grew heavy. Finally, exhaustion overcame excitement. They said their goodnights and crawled back into their swaying, magically reinforced tents. Outside, Harry could still hear Mr. Weasley cheerfully correcting a Norwegian wizard's pronunciation of telephone. A small oil lamp by his bed automatically dimmed as it adjusted itself to the night, and with a tiny, almost comical snore, the flame went out. The deep sleep didn't last long. A malicious shout and the crackle of burning fabric jerked Harry awake. He sat bolt upright, heart pounding. Ron, on the sleeping bag beside him, was up instantly as well, bewildered. "What's happening?" Hermione's voice came from the girls' side of the tent, tight with nervousness. Outside, the earlier celebration had been replaced by a chaos of terrified screams and running feet, punctuated by ugly laughter and sharp incantations. Mr. Weasley's voice cut through it all, low and urgent, full of a tension Harry had never heard from him before. "Everyone stay in your tents. Bill, come with me. Charlie, you watch them." Harry and Ron exchanged a look, then couldn't help but lift the corner of the tent flap to peer out. The sight made their stomachs drop. The campsite was no longer a sea of joy, but a burning, smoky nightmare. About 30 figures, faces hidden beneath hoods and masks, moved in a grim procession. Wherever they passed, tents were set alight, flames licking the canvas and making the masked faces glint in the firelight. The attackers chanted and waved their wands, a cruel coordinated force. Horrifyingly, floating above the group were 4 muggles twisted into grotesque puppet-like shapes, Mr. Roberts, the camp manager, and his family. They hung in the air like marionettes, limbs bent and faces pale, raised high as if they were banners for the attackers. Several of the Death Eaters in the procession had extended their wands toward them. Mr. and Mrs. Roberts' pajamas had been stripped away, and the children's clothes were torn. Mrs. Roberts' desperate cries and the children's terrified screams cut through the night. Mr. Roberts himself lay limp, likely felled by a curse. Chapter 287, Death Eaters. Death Eaters! There are about 30 of them. Sirius's voice dropped low, the anger and cold in it unmistakable. He took in the scene at a glance. The enemy were numerous and brutal. They couldn't hold them off with only a few people. Mr. Weasley's face went pale, but he made a decision quickly. Percy, take the children to the woods to the west, where the fire's smaller. Everyone, keep low and move along the shadows of the tents. Bill, Charlie, come with me. We must try to stop them, at least buy time for the evacuation until the ministry arrives, he urged. But Dad, let me go too. I can help. Percy adjusted his crooked glasses, terror showing in his face, but he still pleaded in a voice that trembled slightly. Your job is more important than fighting, Sirius interrupted, sharp and unambiguous. You must get them to safety. He glanced at Harry. Harry, you go with Percy. No matter what you see or hear, don't stop and don't look back. There was command in his eyes, but worry as well. Then he turned and strode off. Mr. Weasley gripped his wand and, with Bill and Charlie, moved against the panicked crowd toward Sirius to meet the murderous onslaught. But the cruelty of reality outstripped anything they could have imagined. Dozens of Death Eaters had been unleashed, full of malice and power. The Weasleys and their few allies were plainly outnumbered. As the crowd fled toward the Death Eaters, Mr. Weasley and the others moving against the flow stood out immediately and drew fire. Spelllight hissed like venomous snakes. Colored bolts rained down, weaving a net of death in the air. Explosions thundered. Tents took hit after hit, collapsing into burning wreckage. Screams rose from the fleeing people. Some experienced wizards apparated away in panic. Many younger ones simply ran, stumbling on the scattered debris. Mr. Weasley, Sirius and the others could only throw up flickering shield charms, trying desperately to protect the innocent people behind them. Under such a storm of attack, though, they were forced to retreat again and again, pushed into peril. A Death Eater sneered and blasted a towering tent toward them. The burning surge engulfed the spot where Charlie had just been. This way! Quick! Percy called, pale-faced but remembering his father's orders. He gathered Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and the twins and started to run for the western woods. Thick smoke stung their eyes, and the heat licked at their skins. But they hadn't gone far when a wall of flame burst up along a row of connected tents, cutting off their path. The scorching blast forced them back. They were not the only ones trapped. A cluster of Ilvermorny students huddled in panic, spraying futile jets of watery magic that vanished as steam. In the firelight, a huge figure waved a wand, trying to clear a path for students behind her. Hagrid? Harry and Ron coughed and called. That's not Hagrid, Hermione said without looking up, sending an aguamenti stream at the flames. It's Madame Maxime. She's got Beauxbaton students with her. Her watering spell hit the fire and turned to white steam. Then a sinister bolt grazed Hermione's cheek and slammed into a nearby tent, tearing it apart in a spray of sparks. Reducto! Ron barked, firing blindly toward where the curse had come from. We can't stay here. We're sitting ducks, George shouted, his usual grin gone. Follow me. We'll go another way. Percy pointed toward a patch where the flames were less fierce. Stay close to me, he ordered. Just then, a tall Death Eater in a grotesque mask broke through the thin line of defenders and caught sight of the trapped youngsters. He laughed harshly, the tip of his wand glowing. He aimed straight at Percy. Percy threw up his wand. Protego! At almost the same moment, two other voices shouted spells. Expelliarmus! Diffindo! Percy's shield charm just managed to divert the first spell. It smashed an overturned butterbeer barrel with a loud crack. Harry's Expelliarmus shot for the Death Eater's wrist, and the attacker, clearly surprised that the children could react so fast, jerked sideways. Hermione's Diffindo scored a grazing blow across his shoulder. The brief stagger bought them a fraction of time. Stupefy! Ron's yell followed. A searing red bolt struck the Death Eater's back, and he pitched forward with a grunt. His mask flew off, revealing a stunned human face beneath. Bill and Charlie, retreating from the front line, had fallen back near them, soot-streaked and with their robes singed. Sirius and Mr. Weasley were still fighting farther off, spells flashing wildly around them, both under terrible pressure. "There are too many of them. Where is the ministry? Why aren't they here?" Bill bellowed, parrying a curse aimed at Charlie. "They must be held up." Charlie answered through the shock, his arm numb from a blocked dark curse. "There's a small gap on the east side of the woods. You can get through there." Bill sent an obstacle curse at an advancing Death Eater and shouted at the trapped crowd, "Hurry! We can't hold them off much longer." "Go!" Percy snapped, finally shaking off his paralysis. He led everyone toward the eastern gap. Madame Maxime saw the chance and roared at her students. "Follow the Hogwarts students, quickly." She threw her weight into covering their rear, deflecting curses with the thick wand held in her large hands. The Ilvermorny students and others followed suit, and the ragged group staggered through the sea of flames and rubble with spells hissing overhead. In the distance, they saw Death Eaters tormenting a Muggle family, their laughing voices like knives. Despair threatened to take hold again, but Bill moved without hesitation. He dug out the bronze feather badge and fed it a trace of magic. The badge glowed faintly. He pressed it to his lips and whispered, voice tight with urgency, "World Cup campsite under attack by a large number of Death Eaters. Urgent assistance needed." The moment the message went through, the badge's light winked out, as if all hope had been swallowed. Time stretched for another long second amid the explosions and screams, and Bill felt his heart drop. Then, with the signal sent, a surge of magic descended like a falling mountain and engulfed the chaotic camp. Flames froze in mid-roar. Screams and wild laughter were cut off as if someone had pressed a mute. Spell lights in the air shattered simultaneously, striking an invisible barrier and turning into a shower of glowing debris. In that strange stillness, a figure in black wizarding robes appeared without warning in front of the Death Eater ranks, as if he had always been standing there. He held a faintly glowing feather in one hand and a raven in the other. Most of his face was hidden in the shadow of his high collar. Only his eyes were visible, cold, sharp, like ancient ice. They slowly surveyed the inferno, the flames leaping into the sky, the terrified and mangled Muggles, the fleeing witches and wizards, and the struggling Weasleys and Sirius. Finally, his gaze settled on the masked Death Eaters. He released the raven. Behind him, the air twisted, and 1, 2, 3, 8 figures in various robes appeared in an instant, fanning out into a semicircle. They stood silently behind him, their cold magic braided together into an invisible, suffocating field. The Death Eaters' revelry stopped. They hesitated in alarm, instinctively gathering together and pointing their wands at the new threat. The lead Death Eater tried to bluff his way through with a shout, but when his eyes met Sargeras's, the words died in his throat and came out as a frightened gurgle, only heavy breathing sounding from behind his mask. "Oh my God! Who are those people? They have accomplices!" A trapped Ilvermorny student from the States cried, almost dropping his wand. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, busily helping with the evacuation, turned at the cry. Their hearts had tightened at the sight of new figures, but as their eyes swept over them, recognition sparked hope. "It's Professor Greengrass," Harry called out first, voice shaking with relief. Ron and Hermione named others almost at once, fear giving way to astonished joy. "Professor Lupin, Professor Lumina, they're all here!" "Valus Nixia," Madame Maxime added, trembling with surprise. "That's the Dean of Ilvermorny's Thunderbird House. How did they?" Sargeras raised a hand and pointed at the stunned, panicked crowd. "Hummingbird, evacuate the civilians and tend the wounded." One of the figures nodded and apparated away. He turned his head and his gaze flicked over Robin in her denim jacket. "You control the fires, assist Hummingbird, and open a safe corridor." Robin nodded, raising her wand without a word. Sargeras's cold eyes returned to the Death Eaters. His gray pupils glittered in the firelight. "The rest of you," he said, each word carrying an unmistakable intent to kill, "with me. Tear these masked cowards out of the shadows. From now on, Bronze Feather will no longer hide." 6 of the figures behind him moved without hesitation and apparated in a single breath, forming a precise ring around the Death Eaters. Far fewer in number than their enemies, They completed the encirclement with an authority that needed no show of force. Sargeras lifted his wand skyward. A blinding white light shot up and detonated like a second sun, bathing the entire camp in daylight and stripping every shadow bare. "It's him! Greengrass!" Someone among the Death Eaters screamed, recognizing one of the newcomers. Panic overrode their will to fight. Several Death Eaters tried to apparate away. Cloth-tearing, ear-splitting noises ripped through the air. Those who had just dissolved into space reappeared in a grotesque instant, shredded as if by invisible blades. Bodies split into 7 or 8 bloody pieces that hit the ground with a wet, splattering sound. Blood stained the soil. The rest froze, choky with terror. A few still tried. Space gave another ripping scream, and more severed limbs rained down, bits of organs and gore splattering through the sudden silence. "I told you. Today none of you will escape," Sargeras said. The encirclement tightened. Bronzefeather's attacks were nothing like the Death Eaters' chaotic spell-slinging. They were precise, ruthless, and coordinated. Stork waved his wand. The ground beneath the Death Eaters softened and collapsed, turning into a bubbling, viscous swamp that sought to trap and swallow them. "Spread out!" a thin Death Eater shouted, and the quicker ones tried to levitate or jump for the edges. Thunderbird seized the moment. He brought his wand down in a violent arc. A blinding blue-white bolt of lightning tore through the night and slammed into the densest cluster of Death Eaters with a thunderous roar. Several masked figures were instantly charred and fell smoking to the muck. Others convulsed, foamed at the mouth, and collapsed into the swamp. Even in the chaos, some were cruel and opportunistic. 2 Death Eaters rolled out from a flank, avoiding the swamp, and pointed their wands at Stork with murderous intent. "Avada Kedavra," they shouted. 2 green slashes shot out. In the next heartbeat, thick ice shields flashed into being and slammed across the path of the killing curses. There were 2 loud bangs as ice shards flew and the green lights were shattered. Lupin seized the opening and unleashed a pack of wolf spirits that tore through the Death Eaters, bringing down the 2 who had uttered the curse. Snow Owl's Stupefy threaded through gaps to strike the figures writhing in the mud, collapsing them without a sound. Nightingale followed with a cutting ice blast, a cold wave that struck the charred crater where the lightning had hit. The resulting explosion carved a larger pit in the swamp and sent up a forest of ice spikes, sharp, glittering thorns that reflected the flickering flames and the warped masks of the Death Eaters. Throughout it all, Bronzefeather spoke little. Their teamwork was seamless. One's control set up another's strike, one's defense removed a threat for a comrade. The finishers were clinical. Sargeras stood perfectly still until the last Death Eater was trapped by Stork's mud up to his neck and was put down by Snow Owl's Stupefy. Then, and only then, Sargeras nodded once. The battlefield fell quiet. Only the crackle of distant fires, the drip of melting ice, and the stunned breathing of onlookers remained. The once arrogant Death Eater ranks had been broken, dead, captured, or unmasked, and the terror that had gripped the camp began to lift. Sargeras stepped over charred earth and slick mud, picking his way through debris toward the Death Eaters who lay slumped on the ground. The sound of his boots sloshing through puddles of blood and shards of ice was startlingly clear in the cold night. Each measured step seemed to press on everyone's chests. He stopped before a trembling Death Eater and looked down. Shadows swallowed the man's twisted, terrified face. Sargeras extended his wand and flicked the grotesque mask from the man's face. Beneath it was the warped, pale features of a middle-aged man. "Castor Septimus Avery," he said softly, as if recalling an entry from a file. "In ministry records, you once insisted you were under the Imperius, forced to pledge loyalty, not acting of your own will. Is that right?" Avery's lips quivered. The fanatic bravado he had shown while torturing muggles and starting fires was gone, replaced now by raw, icy fear. He could not form an answer. Sargeras's voice remained flat and even. "This operation tonight, were you under the Imperius then, or did you finally act on your true beliefs?" Avery opened his mouth and closed it again, producing nothing but choked, meaningless sounds. Refusing to answer? Sargeras tilted his head. "It doesn't matter. The truth will tell itself." Wait, Avery croaked at last. "I have the right to a formal trial by the Ministry of Magic. By law." "Trial?" Sargeras repeated the word and after a slow nod, added, "Yes, you will stand trial." Hope flickered in Avery's eyes at the word. Sargeras let that hope die when he finished, but not by the ministry. He raised his wand and pointed it at Avery's forehead. The tip of the wand brushed his skin. A cold, blue light flared, devouring surrounding color and sound. A savage current of magic tore through Avery's mind, ripping down the fragile walls he had built. Scenes spilled out, drunken revelries and random cruelty. It was clear now, the atrocities had not been coordinated directly by Voldemort. This had been a spontaneous orgy of violence. That made sense. The Dark Lord would not rashly order such a needless riot when he was likely hiding, clinging to life. Still, one thing in Avery's splintered memories surprised Sargeras. Lucius Malfoy had refused to join this operation. Sargeras let his gaze sweep over the others, faces frozen with terror, with anger, with confusion, and settled back on Avery. There was no anger in his eyes now, only a cold, near-indifferent light. "You fear trial, Avery," he said, his voice ringing out across the camp. "You fear death. You fear the Dementors of Azkaban and rotting in the dark. But you have never feared the loss of the power that makes you feel superior to Muggles." Avery shook his head in frantic denial, making muffled pleas. Sargeras did not listen. He touched the wand to Avery's chest. Avery went rigid. His eyes bulged as his magic was wrenched from him, as if wound up on an invisible spindle and drawn into the wand. His skin drained of color, his features withered. The spark in his eyes guttered until only bewilderment and animal fear remained. A high, keening scream cut across the camp. When Sargeras withdrew his wand, Castor Avery, scion of a pure-blood family, lay there stripped of magic. He was a Muggle in all but bone, hollowed, diminished, as if his very essence had been pulled out. The scene settled into a stunned silence. Turning a wizard into a Muggle, this was a punishment more dreadful than death, a sentence no one had thought possible. Sharp cracks split the quiet. Ministry officials, belated at the scene, apparated in a flurry, led by Barty Crouch. Aurors stepped out in crisp uniforms, wands drawn and faces hard. "Stop! Put down your wands, immediately," Crouch barked. He saw Sargeras's actions and the husk on the ground and went pale. "What are you doing?" Arthur Weasley moved forward to explain that the kneeling captives were Death Eaters from the riot and that Sargeras and his group had come to help. Crouch listened, expression darkening. "This is vigilantism, a grave breach of wizarding law," he said. "Greengrass, put down your wand. Everyone, put down your wands." He singled out the members of Bronzefeather. "All of you, put down your wands." Sargeras turned slowly to face the Aurors. "Mr. Crouch," he said, calm as still water, "I am helping you and your inefficient ministry solve a long-standing problem." "Solving a problem? In such monstrous fashion?" "Mind your status, Sagres Greengrass. You are merely a professor at Hogwarts. You have no right to take the law into your own hands." Crouch's voice cut sharp, and the Aurors behind him bristled. "Monstrous?" Sargeras gestured toward the smoldering wreckage and ruined camp. "Compared to what they did tonight, compared to their countless crimes that went unpunished, depriving them of the tools to do evil seems the most effective solution." He let his wand sweep over the charred bodies, the dried blood, the scattered parts. He ignored the wands aimed at him and fixed Crouch with a hard look. "I must remind you, Mr. Crouch, mind your own business. Don't become a problem I have to solve." "Arrogant," Crouch snapped, fury and a thread of fear coloring his words. "Aurors, seize him!" For a moment, the Aurors hesitated. Then, in a blur, the members of Bronzefeather apparated and formed a silent human wall in front of Sargeras. They raised their wands as one. An atmosphere tempered by blood and fire settled over the field and checked the Aurors' advance. "You are openly defying the law, resisting the ministry, making yourselves enemies of the British wizarding community," Crouch roared. "Unfortunately, we are not under the jurisdiction of the British Ministry of Magic," Remus Lupin said calmly. At that tense moment, Sargeras stepped past the defense line and moved to the next captured Death Eater. He flicked away the mask. Beneath it was the stupid, terrified face of Brutus Crabbe. "No, don't," Crabbe babbled, incoherent. Sargeras showed no pity. He tapped the wand. Crabbe shuddered and then shriveled, his great bulk collapsing inward like a deflating sack. The viciousness left his eyes, replaced by emptiness. Another pure-blood wizard became a Muggle. Sargeras did not stop. Methodically, like a cold butcher, he moved along the line of prisoners, repeating the gesture. Each flare of blue light took a wizard's power and left a hollowed man behind. The ministry officials and aurors could only watch, stunned by the remorselessness of Sargeras and the silent, implacable discipline of Bronze Feather. No one dared intervene. Every witness, survivors, Ilvermorny students, Beauxbaton's faculty and pupils, the Weasleys, Harry, Hermione, Ron, felt a chill creep up their spines. This was not killing. It was a punishment that swallowed hope, more despairing than death. It was a side of Sargeras none of them had seen before. A few more sharp cracks split the night. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, and Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, apparated onto the scene, followed by an escort of officials. Fudge's bowler hat sat crooked. His round face was slick with sweat. When he took in the sight before him, his color drained away. Burning ruins, congealed blood, scattered body parts, and a handful of pureblood family members lying limp and withered on the ground. Avery and Crabbe stared at him with hollow, desperate eyes that felt like needles. He swayed, clutching for balance. Merlin, this was worse than his worst nightmare. Not a riot, but a lawless massacre aimed at pure-blood families. And the perpetrators? His gaze slid to the silent figures clustered at the edge of the carnage, and then to Sagres Greengrass at their head. Cold fear seized him. He feared these brutal wizards, and he feared even more the wrath and international outrage that would follow if the truth came out. This is truly most unfortunate. Fudge's voice came out thin and tremulous. He dabbed at his brow with a handkerchief and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. He tried to break the suffocating standoff. A great tragedy. Thank Merlin, the rioters seemed to have been, contained. He studiously ignored Barty Crouch's ashen face and the aurors with still raised wands, and he avoided looking directly at Sargeras's recent actions. He shifted his gaze between Sargeras and Crouch, as if searching for some graceful pretext to take control. Professor Greengrass, and all you, brave gentlemen and ladies, the Ministry of Magic thanks you for stepping in at this critical moment to protect innocent lives. Amelia Bones stood behind Fudge, far calmer and more composed. Her eyes swept the wreckage with quick, clinical assessment. The casualties, the dealt with Death Eaters, the wounded. Her brows were drawn tight. She said nothing at first, but her pursed lips made clear her deep reservations about what she saw, especially about Sargeras's methods. Fudge, eager to return things to the familiar bureaucratic order, changed tack. But, he said, rubbing his hands, the follow-up, shouldn't it be handled through the ministry's regular procedures? I understand everyone's indignation, but the dignity of the law must be upheld. Everything should be done according to the rules, shouldn't it? These few, he gestured toward the condemned figures on the ground, Death Eaters who had been stripped of magic, lying like muggles, should be sent to the Wizengamot for trial. He tried, clumsily, to salvage the last fig leaf of propriety Sargeras had trampled underfoot. Sargeras watched him quietly, gray eyes unreadable. When Fudge finished, Sargeras spoke slowly. "Minister," he said, "you have two choices regarding tonight." He raised a hand, cutting off the director before she could interject. "First, you can clear the scene, comfort the wounded, and take those power-deprived rioters away. Lock them in Azkaban, or, if you prefer, hand them to Muggle authorities, since they're Muggles now." He let that settle into the chilled air. "Then you can tell the public that a group of unidentified dark wizards caused a disturbance, but that the matter was dealt with promptly." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the trembling captives. "Second, you can insist on your so-called regular procedures." His voice was calm, but the implication was sharp. "But that may not be the outcome you expect. Not for them," he added, turning his attention to Fudge's increasingly pale face. "And not for you, or the order you're clinging to." Fudge froze. Sweat beaded on his temples. He looked from Sargeras to the wizards who had been reduced to powerless figures, then to the grim faces of Bones and Crouch. The veneer of routine procedure felt thin and powerless in the face of what had happened, and it was clear the other side did not care about the ministry's authority. Fear of Sargeras's methods and fear of the situation spiraling beyond his control won out. "Of course," Fudge said finally, his voice dry. He avoided Amelia Bones's disapproving stare. "Of course, Dealing with a crisis sometimes requires unconventional methods. The ministry thanks everyone for their assistance. The subsequent cleanup and appeasement, let us handle it. He said it with humiliation, effectively tearing off the last fig leaf and tacitly approving Sargeras's actions. Amelia Bones took a long breath. She seemed to want to speak, but in the end, she merely shot Sargeras a stern look and issued orders in a low, hard voice. Auror teams, tend the wounded and tally the losses. No unauthorized statements are to be leaked. The order was carried out, but everyone knew this would not end here. As night deepened, the clamor gave way to a brittle silence. Ministry officials and Aurors moved like worker ants, clearing the scene, binding the now powerless former Death Eaters with restraining spells, redundant but necessary, and comforting frightened wizards while warning them, strictly, not to speak of the specifics. Away from the main ruins, in the shadow of a luxury tent not yet fully burned, two figures met briefly. Amelia found Sargeras there. In the dim light, her expression was unusually complicated, worried, and faintly weary. "Sargeras," she said softly, dropping the official tone she'd used before. "Director Bones." Sargeras inclined his head. There was a pause in which Amelia studied him, as if trying to see past his composed surface. "Draining magic, permanently," she said finally, each word deliberate. "This is extremely dangerous dark arts, Sargeras. Even in the darkest ages, I've never heard of something like this. The side effects, the erosion of the caster's mind." "I know what I'm doing, Amelia." He cut in, calm as ever. "Compared to what they did with magic, this is not punishment but correction, eliminating the threat once and for all." "Is that truly the case?" she demanded, stepping closer, her eyes sharp as a torch. "Or are you beginning to enjoy this feeling of controlling others' lives and deaths? What you showed tonight was not merely strength. It was absolute authority that stands above the law. That's dangerous, both for others and for you." Her voice grew heavier. "I've seen too many excellent Aurors who, in fighting the darkness, were themselves consumed by it. They all believed they could control the power, control the situation, even control themselves. What was the result? Don't become one of them, Sargeras. Don't lose control. Once you grow accustomed to using extreme measures to solve problems, the path beneath your feet narrows until there's no turning back." Sargeras listened without expression in the shadows. After a moment, he spoke, almost quietly. "If existing methods had been sufficient, I wouldn't have taken a more extreme path. When law and order fail, someone has to do the necessary things." He looked at his long, steady fingers as he spoke. "As for control, I have never lost it. Nor do I fear judgment," he added. "If one day I have to pay the price for what I've done, I will not evade it." Amelia searched his face as if looking for a crack to pry open, then sighed. "I hope so, Sargeras. You're walking a tightrope, and beneath it is a bottomless abyss." She gave him one last troubled look and turned away. Chapter 291, Discussions. In the Ministry of Magic's temporarily commandeered command tent, Cornelius Fudge paced like a man driven. A cup of tea sat untouched on the table. "A private army! Amelia, you saw them. Well-trained, impeccably coordinated, obedient only to him." He leaned toward Amelia Bones, who was frowning at a report, Barty Crouch's alchemical prosthetic fingers tapping nervously beside her. "And the magic he used, unheard of. Dark and powerful. He stripped Avery and Crabbe, Merlin, right in front of everyone." Fudge gulped at his cold tea as if to calm himself, though his voice trembled with barely concealed panic. "What does he want? What exactly does he want? With that power, and yet he hides at Hogwarts teaching? Impossible. Absolutely impossible." A wild thought took hold of him, and he seized it as if it were the only explanation. "It's about status. He's after my position." His voice went thin with fear. "First, he shows off his power to win hearts. So many people saw him quell that riot tonight. Then he openly humiliates the ministry, trampling on our laws and weakening my authority. Next he'll sway public opinion or use more forceful methods to push me out. That team he formed is his private army, meant to seize power." The more he spoke, the more convinced he became, and sweat dampened his collar again. "We must be vigilant, Amelia. We must find a way to counter him. If we don't, the whole British wizarding world could fall into the hands of this dangerous man." Amelia looked up from her paperwork, her expression cool and austere. "Minister," she said matter-of-factly, It would be unwise to speculate about the motives of a wizard who came to our aid during a crisis without firm evidence. Our immediate task is to deal with tonight's aftermath. That crowd of rioting Death Eaters will damage the ministry's reputation abroad. Still, she could not shake the unease that threaded through Fudge's fear. His conclusion was muddled, but not entirely without basis. If Sargeras truly harbored ambitions, they would not be confined to the position of Minister of Magic. His scope could be far broader and more dangerous. Fudge saw a power struggle. Amelia saw a storm that might engulf the world. "You're right, we must preempt this," he insisted. Fudge settled on the course that served him best, push most of the blame onto lawless remnants of former Death Eaters, and play down Bronzefeather's role, describing it vaguely in public as unidentified international wizarding forces who intervened, their methods open to debate. The loss of Avery and Crabbe's magic would be kept secret. Officially, they were only severely injured and receiving treatment, a barely plausible explanation meant to placate pureblood families. Rumor, however, was already racing ahead of them. The name Sagres Greengrass, paired with whispers of strange, powerful magic, spread through the wizarding world like a shiver. On the Hogwarts Express, the compartment felt unusually heavy. Harry, Ron, and Hermione watched the blurred countryside roll by, none of them willing to break the silence. The night's horrors and Sargeras's cold, detached figure lingered between them. He just did it," Ron said at last, voice dry. "Turned them into muggles, just like stepping on a beetle." He tried to sound less shocked than he felt, but his hands trembled. "They deserved it," he added, as if that settled everything. Harry's voice, when it came, had an intensity that surprised even him. "Have you forgotten how they treated muggles like toys? How they were going to hurt Mr. Weasley and Sirius? If Professor Greengrass and the others hadn't turned up—" He didn't finish, his fists clenched at his sides. "That's not right, Harry," Hermione snapped, before she could stop herself. She turned to them, her brown eyes full of pain and confusion. "No one has the right to do that, permanently strip someone of their magic. If everyone took punishment into their own hands, what would be the point of laws at all?" "The law doesn't work, though, Hermione," Harry shot back. "Even Mr. Weasley said those Death Eaters got away last time because there wasn't enough evidence. Imperio this, that. If Professor Greengrass hadn't done what he did tonight, those people might already be dead, and those Death Eaters could be sitting at home, laughing at the ministry." Hermione's forehead creased, but she nodded slowly. "You're right, there are loopholes. The law can be twisted by power and money. I don't not sympathize with the victims, and I see why Professor Greengrass's actions seemed effective." She let out a sharp breath. "But that's the dangerous part." Her voice took on the same sharp, analytic tone she used for essays. "If something is effective, we're more likely to accept it, even cheer for it. But we can't judge an action only by whether it gives us the result we want in the moment. We have to ask, what happens if that principle is widely applied? If every powerful wizard decided they had the right to deliver judgment, what would our society become? Didn't we fight Voldemort to stop a world run by fear and the will of one person?" Ron looked from Harry to Hermione, clearly torn. "Hermione, I know what you mean. It sounds extreme." He swallowed and scratched his head. But Harry's right, too. Sometimes the rules just don't catch the cleverest villains. "I don't know what's right anymore," he admitted. "Maybe there's something that feels more satisfying than the law, but also less dangerous than full-blown vigilantism. Merlin, this is too complicated." Harry's anger softened a little at Ron's confession. He took a deep breath. "I'm not saying everything Professor Greengrass did was right," he said quietly. "I just can't feel sympathy for those Death Eaters, thinking they might get away again." Hermione's voice, gentler now, cut in. "We all hate them, Harry. We all want them punished. But power needs limits, even when it's used for what seems like the right cause. Otherwise, what did we fight Voldemort for? To stop a world where whoever has the most power decides everyone else's fate." Chapter 292, There's a Horse Behind the Wall. "I agree with Hermione. No one should have unchecked power." Ron spoke up, much calmer than before. "It's like a Quidditch match. You can't just wave your wand and hex the other team's beater because he's nasty, fouls all the time, and gets away with it. The game would turn into a brawl, and there wouldn't be a game anymore. just a fight. He snapped his fingers. Rules are rules, even when they're enforced badly. But what if the referee is blind, Ron? Harry turned to him, his tone softened. What if the referee is bribed, or just scared of that beater? He said quietly, when fairness goes out the window, the game loses its meaning. I'd rather watch them fight than pretend it's still a game. I'm not saying Professor Greengrass did everything perfectly, Ron continued. I'm saying I understand him. And honestly, when I saw those Death Eaters stripped of their ability to hurt people, my first reaction was, relief. Is that terrible? It's the truth. Hermione exhaled softly. I felt relief too, Harry. Don't misunderstand me. When he turned them into muggles, I knew they couldn't cast dark spells anymore, and that made me feel safe. She looked up, sincerity in her eyes. But that's what worries me. It's too easy to forgive or grow used to things we should be wary of. In our hatred of one evil, we can pave the way for another tyranny. She leaned forward, more earnest. We have to hold two truths at once. Professor Greengrass's actions protected people immediately, and the methods he used are extremely dangerous. Even his own position is precarious. Harry was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. He surprised her by agreeing. It's a trap of thought and action, a slippery slope to the extreme. He admitted, I can't deny you, Hermione, but I can't fully agree either. We can't watch people get hurt just because we're afraid things might get worse. He shook his head as if weighing impossible choices. We choose the lesser immediate evil between two risky options. The professor made his choice, risks and all. I understand why you chose otherwise, defending principles even if it means tolerating some evils for now. Maybe your choice is braver than any of ours. I hate this choice too, Hermione murmured. This isn't a choice between right and wrong, she said. It's a decision between bad and worse. Whatever side we pick, we lose something important. Yes, Harry whispered. That's the hardest part. There's no perfect answer. He prevented an immediate disaster, but he might have planted seeds for another one. You're right, Hermione. We have to see both sides. Most importantly, it's not just us who saw it, Hermione pressed. So many people witnessed what he did. What will they think? Will they be afraid? Will they question him? Or will they follow him? Maybe the professor doesn't care, Ron offered. Maybe he already sees everything and is just doing what he wants. The compartment fell into a tense silence. After a long moment, Hermione spoke in a whisper. I can't. I absolutely cannot stand by and watch him become another enemy we'll have to fight one day. She stared out the window as if looking through the glass at that strange, unfamiliar figure. We can't enjoy the protection and peace he brings and then turn our backs when he starts to lose his way. She turned to Harry and Ron, resolute. We have to do something. The declaration broke the deadlock like a spell. If we rely on his power and then cower when he uses it, we're no different from those Death Eaters. Hermione, don't say that. Ron hastily intervened. The professor can't become another you-know-who. Hermione's right, Harry said, steady now. This isn't a debate about who is right. If his power needs restraint, we can't just be bystanders. You mean we talk to him? Ron's voice held a reluctant skepticism. Go to Professor Greengrass and say, Professor, your power is dangerous. Could you explain yourself? That doesn't seem likely. Of course not like that, Hermione cut in, quick and precise. We don't approach a wizard who just saved many people with suspicion and judgment. That would be rude and foolish. We need dialogue. She chose her words carefully. We need to understand his intentions. What has he seen that we haven't? Does he realize the risks he's taking? What are his plans? We must first accept him as a leader who might be headed down a dangerous road, not as an enemy. Talk? A long, sarcastic drawl came from the compartment doorway. Draco Malfoy lounged against the frame, that familiar smirk in place. He'd clearly heard most of the conversation. With whom? Professor Greengrass? I was expecting some grand plan, and it turns out to be this? Ron couldn't help himself. And what's your brilliant idea, Malfoy? Relax, Weasley. Malfoy pushed off the doorframe and strolled into the compartment, ignoring Ron's glare, eyes sweeping over the three of them. I just happened to overhear some people overestimating themselves, discussing things they clearly don't understand. He smirked at Harry. Potter, and you, Granger. You always like playing heroes, don't you? Now you're worrying whether the professor should be allowed to use his power. How touching. Hermione bristled. This isn't heroics, Malfoy. No power. Should be unchecked? Malfoy interrupted. Save your naive speeches, Granger. You don't understand. He stepped forward, gray eyes flashing. What Professor Greengrass did is how the world actually works. Magic is power, and power is truth. He proved it, clean and decisive, and you want to put chains on him? He sneered. Ridiculous, like three chattering gnomes trying to manage a giant. He looked down his nose at them. His power is beyond your imagination, and his decisiveness is something you'll never have. He did what everyone else was too weak to do, and your first instinct is fear and doubt? Pathetic. Harry and Hermione both felt sickened by Malfoy's blatant might makes right rhetoric. The fragile camaraderie they'd built last term disappeared in an instant. Ron, however, didn't explode. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? He studied Malfoy, as though he were an odd specimen. Sounds like you're his #1 fan, Malfoy, so by your new power is truth logic. He paused, then leaned in, serious. Has House Malfoy given up its old goals and pledged itself to him? I haven't seen your father among those around Professor Greengrass. Malfoy's face flushed, then drained to an even paler shade. He opened his mouth but found no rebuttal that would land. Ron had thrown the family's past disgrace back at him, using Malfoy's own argument against him. Malfoy sputtered. You dare! His voice trembled with fury, his hands clenched. Did I say something wrong? Ron shrugged, almost innocent. What you said sounds like you're hunting for a new patron. Malfoy glared, chest rising and falling, then unexpectedly his anger folded back into sarcastic amusement. He half smiled as if reconquering the conversation. Heh! Why not? He regarded the three of them with a provocative pity. Don't you want to join the professor's circle? Or are you so arrogant you think one day you'll be brave enough to raise your wands against Professor Greengrass? Chapter 293, Sunshine and Shadow. Around the long, austere table, the members of Bronze Feather sat or stood. Despite the overwhelming victory they'd achieved not long before, the room was filled with a silencing, uneasy hush rather than celebration. Lupin wiped his wand with deliberate motions, his brow deeply furrowed. Over the past few days, several familiar faces in the Order of the Phoenix had sent him letters. On the surface, they read like ordinary greetings and inquiries, but between the lines, each one tried to pry for news about the Bronze Feather, testing for the organization's intentions and movements. Each missive felt like another quiet interrogation, another weight added to his shoulders. Have we revealed ourselves too early? The thought hummed in the air. Miss Snow Owl's voice was soft but precise as she voiced what many felt. Everyone's eyes are on us now. It seems we've lost the advantage of the shadows. Several looks turned to Sargeras, waiting for his answer. Sargeras toyed with a handful of Akami feathers that shimmered and shifted in his palm, not lifting his head. There's a difference between concealing ourselves and hiding, he said. We conceal to build strength, to watch our opponents, to wait for the right moment, not because we're afraid of being seen. He closed his fingers and the feathers stilled. Slowly, he raised his eyes and let his gaze sweep the room. Take Britain, for example. Until recently, the Ministry of Magic was timid and incompetent. The shadow of Lord Voldemort, though not yet fully cast, already paralyzed people with fear. The pureblood families hedged and wavered. The whole British wizarding world looked like a ship taking on water. Most pretended not to see the leaks. Worse, some kept hammering new holes. We stepped in not to show off, but to shatter that false peace. He put the feathers away with a calm motion. I want everyone to understand, the old rules don't hold anymore. Cowardice will not be tolerated. Compromise will not be regarded as virtue. Darkness will not be left to run unchecked. Of course, some will be frightened. Fudge will see me as a threat and try to use bureaucracy to smear and contain us. That's fine. It proves we struck a nerve. A unified, efficient Ministry of Magic allied with us would only restrain us. A ministry that's split, fearful, and bickering doesn't even qualify to do so. He paused and his voice dropped. As for the pureblood families, their fear and suspicion are exactly what we need. The fate of those Death Eaters will hang over everyone who dares to imitate them. Some desperate souls might throw themselves completely behind Voldemort. He let the possibility hang for a beat. But that's useful. It lets us separate friends from foes more quickly and tear away hypocritical masks. We have lost the ease of the shadows, but we have gained something more important. His gaze sharpened and swept the assembled members. We have become a symbol, an absolutely powerful one. We have changed from a scattered nuisance into a decisive force that no one can ignore. From now on, every faction, whether the International Confederation, the British Ministry, Dumbledore, Voldemort, or any fence-sitters, will have to reckon with us. They will speculate about our intentions and fear our interventions before making decisions. When his voice trailed off, the room held its breath. Sargeras's tone softened, just a fraction. Stepping into the light also brings benefits the shadows cannot offer. For example, yesterday I received a letter from Engelbert Fontaine, principal of Ilvermorny. He looked directly at Thunderbird, Bereknar Wolf, dean of Thunderbird House. The old man's lips tilted in a small, steady smile. He wrote that he's preparing to step down and strongly recommends that Thunderbird succeed him as principal. The faces around the table changed subtly. The principalship of Ilvermorny was more than an honorary title. It carried enormous influence across the North American wizarding world. No one spoke at first, but the mood shifted. Power had come knocking in the daylight in an unexpected way. Sargeras raised a finger, inviting others to share. I suppose Thunderbird isn't the only one getting what you might call special attention. You've all run into unusual opportunities these past few days, haven't you? Stork pushed his glasses up. This morning Winrose, the long-absent editor-in-chief of the Wizarding Confederation Gazette, ran into me. He spent half an hour lamenting the difficulties of reporting and the chaos of public opinion. He mentioned he's looking for a successor who deeply understands the complex global situation and possesses uncommon decisiveness, and then gave me his private contact information. A few stunned looks flashed around the room. The Gazette was the mouthpiece of the International Confederation. The editor's favor could shape opinion across nations. Even the hint was a step far beyond Stork's previous reach. Robin chuckled, a hint of playful sarcasm in her voice. My change isn't quite that dramatic, but it's amusing. My boss, the sort who treats staff like house elves, suddenly decided to be magnanimous. He took on all my backlog and announced with a big grin that for my recent outstanding contributions, she let the phrase hang, savoring its absurdity. I've been promoted to office manager of the International Magical Transportation Department's Flow Network office. I now have a lot more personal time to pursue my own matters. A few quiet laughs followed. The title might not sound lofty, but control over the Flow Network is a strategic lifeline for global wizard movement. In uncertain times, the office's importance is immeasurable. Sargeras listened until the last member finished, and then spoke again. This is the advantage of sunlight. Shadows can grant safety or convenience, but sunlight grants real influence and power. They have seen our strength and sensed our will. We are no longer a variable they can ignore. We are an actor they must confront, placate, or win over. What they offer isn't charity, it's ransom, tickets to temporary peace. They will try to bind us with the system, to tame us with authority and rules. They fear uncontrolled power, so they'll offer gold-plated reins. He let the image sit in the room. All of this is precisely what we need. The resources and advantage these positions provide can't be won by hiding in the short term. Accepting them isn't being co-opted. It's our first step toward inserting ourselves into the center of global magical power. We will use their rules to remake the rules. We will use the authority they grant to build the foundation of a new order. He stood, his gaze sweeping every face. Do not doubt, do not resist. Take these favors calmly. Their fear is turning into submission. He paused for emphasis and enunciated each word. Then, use it to wield the sword better. Hogwarts, headmaster's office. Dumbledore stood before the Pensieve, silver threads of memory coiling and eddying in the basin until they stilled. He had just finished watching eyewitness memories provided by members of the Order and a few absolutely trusted friends, fragments of fire and screams, of judgment and deterrence. His blue eyes were stripped of their usual twinkle. Only a deep fatigue remained. Fudge's muddled leadership, the Ministry's impotence, the Death Eater's rampant boldness, the pureblood family's vacillation, and Sargeras's extreme methods. Together, the pieces sketched a perilous picture. "If you ask me, Albus, you're the one who invited this man in," Phineas Nigellus said from his portrait, his voice slow and mocking. "You may have unleashed a beast harder to control than the Dark Lord. He has little patience for your tenderness and understanding." Dumbledore didn't turn. He only sighed. "To fight darkness, sometimes you need different hunters, Phineas. Sargeras is doing what's necessary in a way I cannot." "Like turning wizards into muggles?" Ayesha Sackendenberg's portrait snapped. "That crosses a line, Albus. That's something else entirely." "I know," Dumbledore admitted, his voice heavy. "It's a dangerous road. I must make sure he doesn't slide into an abyss none of us can climb out of." He looked at Fawkes, the phoenix perched nearby. "At the same time, we must ensure Minister Fudge's fear doesn't drive him into more foolishness, pushes that might force Sargeras to establish a new order outright." Shocking insider info. World Cup riot mastermind shrouded in mystery. Mysterious third-party force emerges. For days, the magical papers had been dominated by sensational headlines. Reporters luridly described the violence at the World Cup campsite and the brutality of the Death Eaters. On that point, they did not lie, and then turned to a single tantalizing angle, a group of mysterious wizards of unknown identity and ruthless methods. Articles hinted at undercurrents in the international wizarding community and posed questions. Who were these strangers who arrived so swiftly? What was their purpose? Were they linked to forces trying to undermine the International Confederation? The press stopped short of naming anyone, but most readers knew exactly whom the papers implied. The overall effect stoked public panic. An uncontrolled private armed force was active. Official statements from various ministries were relegated to small, impotent boxes in the corners of the pages. Then, as if guided by an invisible hand, the public tide abruptly shifted. Principal Eaglebert Fontaine of Ilvermorny announced his retirement, citing personal reasons, and that Baraknar Wolf, the dean of Thunderbird House, would take over as principal. The moment that news broke, the feverish speculation about the mysterious third force died away, replaced by a heavy, contemplative silence. Under cover of night, on a deserted street, Wormtail Peter huddled in an oversized black robe that nearly swept the ground, making his already small frame seem even more pathetic. His face was ashen, his breathing quick, and every minor use of magic left him dizzy. His power was almost gone. The cold body of Nagini was tightly coiled around his torso and arms, her head resting on his shoulder. Her scarlet tongue flicked out now and then, bringing a bone-deep chill and an oppressive weight. The great snake was still weakened, but a cruel excitement pulsed from within her. From the belly of Nagini, Lord Voldemort's voice issued, thin and urgent. "Hurry up, Wormtail." The voice was hoarse, but soaked with a chilling relief, as if Voldemort had narrowly avoided disaster. Sagres Greengrass, his performance at the World Cup was extraordinary, draining wizards of their magic. "Ha! I underestimated his cruelty and imagination. Was he the one who did this to you?" Nagini's body tightened at the emotions the soul inside her radiated, constricting Peter until he could barely breathe. "Now be grateful, you fool," Voldemort continued, a note of lingering fear braided with dark admiration. "Be grateful we did not act rashly then, that we did not walk straight into his trap. Otherwise, we would have ended up like those useless people, or worse. That sort of power." He paused, as if still taking in the shock of the news. "But precisely because of this, Wormtail, our plans must change. The Ministry of Magic must be in chaos now. This is our opportunity. Bertha Jorkins, that foolish woman, she saw things she shouldn't have. Even if old Barty wiped her memory, that won't stop the great Lord Voldemort." They halted before a house with its curtains drawn tight. It belonged to Barty Crouch. "Now, knock on the door," Voldemort ordered, Nagini's head brushing Peter's neck like a threat. Peter's hand shook, but he forced his heavy fist to strike the thick wooden door. The door opened a crack. Old Barty Crouch peered out, pajamas and dressing gown, eyes sharp and wary, his hand instinctively brushing for the wand in his pocket. At that instant, Nagini lashed out like a bolt, coiling with astonishing speed around the old man. Her cold body squeezed, he gave a choked cry, and his wand clattered from his hand. "Now!" Voldemort snapped. Though Peter's own magic was nearly spent, he raised his wand out of habit, but it was unnecessary. From Nagini's open jaws, a thin, twisted purple light shot forth. almost invisible in the dark, and struck old Barty's forehead. The imperious delivered from within the snake. His struggling ceased at once. His eyes went hollow and vacant. "Go inside," Voldemort commanded, voice crackling with urgent excitement. Peter stumbled into the house, Nagini dragging the limp, Imperio-controlled old Barty behind him. The door closed soundlessly. Inside, the house was neat, cold, and deathly silent. Nagini relaxed her hold only slightly, remaining coiled around the old man like a sentinel. Through Nagini's senses, Voldemort surveyed the cramped, orderly rooms. "Now, my loyal servant," his voice hissed through the snake, cold as venom, "take us to see your good son." Under the old man's numb guidance, they climbed the creaking stairs to a door concealed behind a large map. The entrance was protected with complex locking charms and wards, but for the master who now stood under Imperio, those protections were nothing. Old Barty stilled, lifted his wand, and muttered a few soft counter-charms. With a dull click, the lock sprang open. A smell of dust and potions spilled out as the door opened onto a small, dim attic. A single oil lamp burned in a corner, casting a weak light. On a simple bay, a gaunt, pale young man, hair pale blonde, eyes hollow and vacant, so empty it seemed his soul had been leached away. This was Barty Crouch Jr., reduced to a shell by years of control. Beside the bed, a house elf stooped, deftly wiping an empty potion bowl with a rag. Hearing the door, she assumed her master had come to check on the patient. "Master, Winky has already given Barty his medicine. He is very quiet today. Winky will take good care of," she chirped in her high voice, not turning. Her words cut off. The elf spun around, and at the sight in the doorway, her wide tennis ball eyes expanded with raw terror. Her master stood there with empty eyes, and behind him coiled a monstrous python, tongue flicking, and by its side a trembling, wretched figure in a huge black robe. Master?" Winky shrieked, the bowl flying from her hands and smashing on the floor. "Behind you! Snake! Bad wizard! Danger!" She lunged instinctively to protect the bed, to shield her charge, or bar the way. But the great snake struck with impossible speed. A black flash, a single fang. No, Winky's cry was short. The elf was bitten, coiled, and swallowed. The attic filled with a sickening wet sound and the soft crack of crushed bones. Then there was silence. Nagini withdrew, her scales rustling, the bulge along her length marking her meal. Peter sagged to the floor in terror, one hand clamped over his mouth to stifle any sound. From the belly of Nagini, Voldemort's voice drifted, cool and cruel, with a hint of pleasure. "Cleaned up. An unnecessary nuisance. Now, Wormtail, go and see our dear friend." Peter Pettigrew scrambled to the bedside. Barty Crouch Jr. lay limp, his eyes vacant as he stared at the ceiling. At the command coming from within Nagini, Barty's body stiffened, and as if on cue, he began to mutter a string of complex spells. With each incantation, the hold on him loosened. Color returned to his face in patches, and his hands trembled. The moment the Imperious was broken, he shot upright, gasping for air as if he'd been hauled out of deep water. Bewilderment washed his features for a heartbeat. Then he saw the father under the Imperious by the bed, the coiled, bloated snake, and the loathsome Wormtail. Finally, his gaze slid over Nagini's pulsing flanks, and as if cutting through flesh, found the will there. Joy, fervent and almost frantic, chased away the confusion. His cheeks flushed unnaturally pale. "Master!" Barty's voice was hoarse, reverent, and shaking. He rolled off the bed and prostrated himself before Nagini. "It's you. It really is you. You've come to rescue your most loyal servant." "Yes, Barty." The voice came from deep within the serpent, calm and satisfied. "I have returned, and you will serve me again. We need a plan, a ritual to restore me to a proper body. You will be the key to that plan." Barty looked up, fanaticism and relief making his face shine, as if years of confinement had been erased in that instant. "Always at your service, Master. Whatever it takes, even if I must give my life." The attic smelled of dust, rotten wood, and a faint metallic tang of old blood. Nagini lay coiled on the cold boards, once sleek and powerful. Her body twitched with effort, scales dulled and here and there blackened as if singed. Her breathing came in ragged, shallow pulls. Each inhale seemed harder than the last. From her belly, a cold voice echoed into Peter Pettigrew's cowering mind. "Wormtail." The voice was muffled, as if heard through water, yet it carried a chill of authority. "This body won't last much longer. Greengrass's curse is like a parasitic growth. It burns Nagini's life every day. It torments me. Peter shuffled a little closer, never daring to approach the snake itself. He stammered, terrified. Master, what should we do? More dittany? Some potion? I'll go steal some. Those things only soothe the surface. They do not touch the root. Voldemort's words were sharp. What we need is a true resurrection ritual, a ritual that will give me a powerful, proper body, one of my own. Not this, hiding inside a beast like a leech. Peter seized on a hope and nodded so vigorously his breath came in quick little gasps. Yes, a resurrection ritual. The tools are here, and the servants. There are 2 of us. Master, we can catch someone right now. Anyone. Use his blood. Idiot. The rebuke snapped like a whip. Peter flinched. Do you think the filthy blood of any mudblood is worthy of bearing the Dark Lord's rebirth? Master is right, Wormtail, Barty said, struggling upright. He pushed his pale, light hair from his forehead. His face was deathly but alight with devotion. How could mediocre blood be used for Master's rebirth? It must be a ritual of meaning, a rite that will wash away the shame. Voldemort paused at that, and beneath the pause, a hardening like frost crept into his voice. That boy. Harry Potter. Nagini convulsed as if the name sparked a current through her. His mother's sacrifice left a deep protective charm on him. That charm has foiled me shamefully. I will use his blood. Peter's small eyes blinked in baffled fear. But if it has that protection, won't it be even more dangerous? Precisely because it has that protection, you short-sighted fool. The voice grew cunning. The blood of an enemy carrying protective magic will not only rebuild my body. His tone rose, and Nagini's tail slapped the floor in impatient strokes. It will allow me to absorb that power. The magic Lily Potter left in her son will no longer be a shield against me. It will become my talisman. Barty's eyes shone. He leaned forward, trembling with excitement. I understand, Master. It's not just resurrection, it's conquest. To take the boy's blood and turn his mother's safeguard into our own, ingenious. With his blood, you will become stronger and twist that protection to your purpose. Exactly. Voldemort's voice deepened. Therefore, it must be Harry Potter's blood. This is crucial. It must be foolproof. I have waited 13 years. A few more months will not matter. His next command was cold and absolute. Now, put aside your fear. Nagini turned her head toward Peter, tongue flicking. Your task is to keep Nagini alive until all is ready. Barty, her gaze swung to the thinner man. You must bring that boy to me. Peter's knees knocked together. But how? He is protected and watched. Wormtail let out a low hiss that carried through the rafters. Do not be idle. That meddling woman, Bertha Jorkins, spilled some useful things for me before she died. Barty's face lit with eager anticipation. Do you have a plan, Master? Yes. The name came slow and dangerous. Hogwarts, Dumbledore, fool that he is, has agreed to host the Triwizard Tournament, and for safety, he has brought a retired Auror, Alastor Moody, to be Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Moody? Barty's expression flickered with both hatred and caution. That old paranoid, always watching everyone? Precisely him. Voldemort's voice cooled like iron. This is our opportunity. Barty, you will leave here. Barty vaulted to his feet as if honored. At once, Master. What shall I do? Find Moody. Subdue him before he reaches Hogwarts. The command left no room for argument. Use Polyjuice Potion, take his appearance, then go to Hogwarts and take his place. Once inside, watch the boy closely. Deliver him to me. Barty's smile was feverish. So I will be Moody, and I will bring Harry Potter right into your hands. Exactly. Satisfaction hummed in the voice from Nagini's belly. Dumbledore believes he has strengthened Hogwarts' defenses, but he will not know that his most trusted man is my servant. Bring him to me before anyone suspects. And you, Wormtail. Suddenly, the tone turned lethal. Nagini's head swung back to Peter. The threat coiled in every hiss. Care for Nagini and for me. Guard this place. If before I am fully restored, either of us should suffer because of your failure. The sentence ended in a silence that promised no mercy. Peter's whole body trembled. Yes, yes, Master, he squealed, throwing himself prostrate on the boards. Nagini gave a long, pained, but satisfied hiss that vibrated through the rafters. Sargeras's office had been completely renovated lately, almost unrecognizable. Faintly glowing runes were set into the walls, the books had been cleared from the shelves, and in their place were strange specimens and shimmering crystal containers. The space no longer felt like an office so much as an alchemy workshop, crossed with a magical creature research lab. In the center, a clear area had been made. A blood-red magic circle drawn on the floor was slowly dimming, its residual enchantment flickering like fireflies before evaporating. Sargeras stood at the edge of the circle, gently stroking the feathers along Loyalties' flank. At first glance, Loyalties looked the same as always, black as night, eyes keen and intelligent. But on closer inspection, there was a faint iridescence at the tips of its wings, the graft of alchemy traits. A rare look of satisfaction touched Sargeras' face. "Now then," he said calmly, "shrink." In an instant, the astonishing change began. Loyalties' body seemed to fold in on itself, contracting as if the skin had been deflated. The large raven dissolved into a creature the size of a buzzing mosquito, wings translucent and vibrating as it circled Sargeras' finger. Only the outline that still held the raven's shape and its unnervingly sharp, miniaturized eyes betrayed what it had been. Sargeras nodded. "Very good. Expand." The tiny creature bloomed outward like a balloon. Its body swelled, wings unfurled, and it quickly surpassed the bulk of a common hawk, then a hippogriff. Black feathers took on a cold, metallic sheen. The beak became a giant scythe, talons like anchor hooks. The form was ferocious and full of power. Before long, Loyalties rivaled a full-grown Ukrainian iron-bellied dragon, nearly 60 feet from beak to tail, exuding a suffocating presence. The office had been enlarged with an undetectable extension charm. Otherwise, it could not have contained such a beast. Loyalties let out a low, rolling cry that sounded like thunder. Sargeras looked up at the colossal creature, lips tilting in the smallest of smiles. Perfect. A leather-bound notebook and an auto-writing quill at his side immediately began to record as Sargeras dictated. The speed of the size change and the stability of the form both meet expectations. The alchemy's size-changing ability has integrated well. The quill scratched quickly across the page as he spoke in a clear voice. Record, 6th bloodline grafting optimization. Subject, Loyalties, Raven. Grafting source, Peruvian alchemy. Result, size-changing ability stabilized. Subject can freely control size within preset limits at will. Minimum form approximately mosquito-sized, near-perfect stealth and environmental integration. Maximum form, body length can reach 58 to 60 feet, wingspan proportionally increased. Physical strength, power, and defenses estimated comparable to an adult female dragon. Transformation process smooth, no obvious pain or rejection. High tactical value for reconnaissance, surprise attack, deterrence, and frontal assault. Long-term stability requires observation for potential unknown side effects. The giant raven lowered its head and gently nudged Sargeras' palm with a beak that could have lifted a horse, an act of submission and affection. Sargeras patted the steel-hard beak. Return. The massive form folded down once more, shrinking until it was the ordinary-looking raven again. It flew back to perch on his shoulder, tipped its head, and preened at the base of its wings with its beak. Sargeras murmured to himself, mosquito size, enough to slip into any crevice unnoticed. Dragon size, enough to intimidate or wreak havoc when needed. Loyalties made a soft, low chirp against his shoulder. Sargeras stroked its feathers, and for a moment a cold glint passed through his eyes. "Don't rush," he said quietly. "Someday, I will obtain the Phoenix's rebirth ability for you as well." He moved to the window and looked out toward the shimmering black lake and the blurred silhouette of the forbidden forest in the night. "Go on, take a flight." Inside the Great Hall at Hogwarts, the sorting ceremony had just ended. The 4 long tables still buzzed with the excitement of new students finding their places. Golden plates and goblets glittered under the star-studded ceiling, but all chatter fell away when the silver-bearded, long-haired man at the center of the staff table rose. Albus Dumbledore raised his hands. His gentleness and quiet authority quieted the hall as if by a spell. "Welcome. Welcome back to Hogwarts for a new school year." His blue eyes swept over the students behind his half-moon spectacles. "Before we enjoy this splendid dinner, which I hope will alleviate some of the fatigue from your travels, allow an old man a moment to share some exciting news." The students edged forward, even the ghosts drifting closer. After long discussions and careful preparations by the Department of International Magical Cooperation and the Department of Magical Games and Sports, I am delighted to announce. Dumbledore drew out the pause, and every eye in the hall turned to him. The Triwizard Tournament, interrupted for more than a century, will be held again this year at Hogwarts. A second of stunned silence was followed by an uproar. The hall erupted like a tide. Students shouted and cheered, many leaping from their seats, faces alight with excitement and disbelief. Tales of the tournament's dangers and glories had been whispered for years. Since the inter-school duel competition 2 years prior, rumors had only increased. Dumbledore waited until the noise subsided a little before continuing. There will be some differences from past traditions. In addition to our familiar friends from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, we have been in active contact with several other prestigious schools. The final number of participating schools may surprise you. Murmurs spread through the hall, speculation about which schools might be joining. Dumbledore clapped his hands gently for attention. This is a rare chance to promote exchange and friendship within the international magical community. His expression then turned serious. But I must emphasize that the events of the Triwizard Tournament are challenging and can be extremely dangerous. Many have lost their lives in the past. Therefore, after discussions with the Ministry of Magic and the school, it has been decided, for safety, that only students who are 17 years of age and willing to accept the consequences will be allowed to register for selection. The announcement was like a bucket of cold water to many younger students. Disappointed groans and protests rose from those who had dreamed of entering the tournament long before they reached 17. Chapter 297, Mad-Eye Moody. Just as the noise reached a peak, bang! The heavy Great Hall doors were thrown open with a crash that silenced everyone. A figure filled the doorway, leaning on a long staff. He was stocky and a little stiff, each step punctuated by the heavy thud of wood on stone. Torchlight moved over him. When his face came fully into view, many students gasped and some squeaked. His face was a map of scars, but the most striking thing were his eyes. One small, dark, and sharp. The other, a large, bulging eyeball that swiveled independently. The magical eye seemed to have a mind of its own, darting to the ceiling one moment, under the tables the next, then scanning the air above the students. Without changing expression, the rugged man strode to the staff table, his steps like a drumbeat. He stopped beside Dumbledore, his normal eye fixed on the headmaster while the magical eye continued its restless spinning, sweeping over the other professors. Albus. His voice was hoarse and rough, like sandpaper on wood. "I'm not late, am I? Had a bit of trouble on the way, needed sorting out." "Not late at all, Alastor," Dumbledore replied cheerfully, as if Moody's alarming entrance were perfectly ordinary. In fact, just in time for dinner. He turned to the students, who still sat stunned. "Allow me to introduce your new professor for this year, Alastor Moody. As you may have guessed, he will be your defense against the dark arts teacher this year." A smattering of tentative applause broke out. Most students, especially the first years, were still intimidated by Moody's fearsome look and presence. Moody seemed entirely unfazed. He gave the great hall one last sweep with his wild eye, as if looking for a dark wizard hiding in the rafters, then plumped down in the empty seat reserved for him with a dull thud. Dumbledore announced dinner, and immediately the tables filled with roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, buttered potatoes, peas, roasted carrots, pies. The smell spread through the hall. Yet the murmur of conversation, as if amplified, grew louder than the food. After a holiday apart, everyone had too much to catch up on. The Triwizard Tournament. How amazing would it be to represent Hogwarts? A third-year Gryffindor cried, waving a chicken leg as if it were a trophy. His friend poured cold water on him. "Wake up! Didn't you hear Dumbledore? You have to be 17 to sign up. We've still got years left under our parents' and professors' noses." "But 1,000 galleons," the first student protested, eyes shining. "The winner gets 1,000 galleons. Why can't we be second years? I could totally do it." "Are you serious?" "Of course." Other groups were talking about the Quidditch World Cup and the rumors that followed. My dad said it was chaos, masked people setting fires, hurting muggles, and then he appeared. A younger student leaned in conspiratorially toward the staff table. No one saw how he did it, but a green light flashed, and at least 2 Death Eaters fell, dropped dead. The Ministry tried to cover it up, but people saw. "He used that spell?" a second year whispered. Avada Kedavra? Of course. What else would it be? Good riddance. Deal with scum like that properly. Another shrugged. Illegal, though, isn't it? He was stopping a riot. Self-defense, someone argued. The ministry making a fuss about a professor protecting us is a joke. Hufflepuffs were more preoccupied with the newcomer himself. Professor Moody? He looks terrifying. A girl peered at the staff table. Why does his eye spin like that? It's a magical eye. My dad said he's Mad Eye Moody, an Auror who caught loads of dark wizards. Bit paranoid, though. Magical eye? Like a charm? Is that leg made of wood? What else could it be? At the staff table, the mood was calmer. Dumbledore spoke quietly with Professor McGonagall. Snape cut his steak without expression, his dark gaze flicking coldly at Moody as the new professor talked with Flitwick. Hagrid was unusually animated, loudly suggesting creatures the tournament might need, and Professor Sprout nodded along. Sargeras sat eating without expression, though his sharp eyes kept returning to the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Alastor Moody. Within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, his name was legend. During Sargeras's brief time as an Auror, Moody had already retired, but his reputation lingered. He had put more dark wizards in Azkaban than most, and had been a special instructor for Auror trainees. His stringent security drills left an indelible mark on every class. Sargeras remembered Moody's lectures on spotting dark arts traps. Scarred, imposing, and with that unforgettable magical eye, lost, it was said, in the mission before his retirement when he traded it for the imprisonment of 3 dark wizards. Looking at the man now, drinking from a hip flask, gruff, his eyes spinning wildly, Sargeras felt a flicker of something close to recognition and pity. Years and war left marks on everyone. This Moody seemed older, more paranoid than the instructor he'd known, and his suspicion had hardened. He could hear the man's old catchphrase in his mind. Constant vigilance. Moody, talking with several professors, suddenly boomed it out. A few students nearest the staff table, eavesdropping, flinched and knocked their forks into pumpkin soup. No one cleaned up. All ears were on him. Yesterday, some dark wizard actually tried to attack me, right in my own yard. Moody's voice carried, his normal eye fixed on his listeners while the magical one kept spinning. He snorted, took a long swig from his flask, and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. Smelt wrong. Dark arts in the air. He leaned in, lowering his voice as if reliving it. I pretended not to notice and kept walking with my staff. Thud, thud, thud. Every nerve taut. My ears picked up the smallest rustle. My nose could tell every dark arts trace beyond the stench of trash. Snape's face was unreadable, a faintly mocking curl at the corner of his mouth. Moody's eyes narrowed. Then I heard it, he said, grinning like a man who had just beaten a puzzle. A breathing behind that filthy bin, trying to hold it in, but it leaked. His magical eye fixed as if seeing back into that moment. I didn't hesitate, not for a second. Turned, drew my wand, and fired a blasting curse. Bang! Moody bellowed, making several students jump. Hit the bin square on, blew it to pieces. A note of triumph crept into his voice. Rotten veg, moldy potato skins, torn paper, empty butterbeer cans, and some sticky muck erupted like a garbage volcano, splattering the whole wall. And then, did you catch the attacker, Alastor? McGonagall asked, concerned. Moody's face darkened. The magical eye went into a frantic spin. No, he shook his head. I'm getting old, Minerva, he grunted. That cunning bastard used the explosion and the flying rubbish as cover. Apparated clean away. No footprints. Neat, professional. But I hit him, sure his side was grazed. Even if he's not dead, he'll suffer. What does that show? He demanded. They're getting braver, daring to come to my house. Constant vigilance. He roared the phrase. The whole great hall fell into a hush. At the Gryffindor table, the trio listened rapt. Harry felt a tension in his chest that rivaled any duel. Hermione admired Moody's quick action. Ron, though, had a strange look. He leaned in close, and voice barely above a whisper said, Listen, what he just said isn't completely true. What do you mean? Harry asked. My dad was dealing with this exact thing late yesterday, Ron whispered, swallowing a slice of pie. Moody's been a top Auror and caught loads of dark wizards. That's true, but the ministry thinks he's gotten a bit overcautious. Hermione's eyebrows rose. Ron, you can't speak about a professor like that. I'm not saying it, Dad is, Ron protested. There wasn't a dark wizard attack at all. Moody thought someone was about to attack him, didn't see anyone, and he cast a blasting curse that blew up a public rubbish bin. Harry and Hermione stared. "And then?" Harry asked. Ron fought not to laugh. "That bin went off like an angry Cornish pixie. Trash everywhere. Horrible smell. Moody thought the attacker was hiding in the mess. Kept running around in the rubbish rain. Wand up, shouting stuff like, 'It's you! Come out!' drawing loads of attention." "A few muggles saw the explosion and shouting and called the police," Hermione murmured, shocked. "The muggle police turned up and saw a mess and an old bloke brandishing a stick and shouting," Ron went on. "Luckily, ministry people and my dad got there in time, obliviated the muggles, and tidied things up. The ministry even warned Moody, before he starts shouting about vigilance next time, make sure you've got a target, they said." "Merlin's beard," Hermione breathed, as if seeing the world a little differently. They looked back up. Moody's magical eye was fixed on Professor Greengrass, his normal eye unblinking. Harry felt, with a prickle at the base of his neck, that the man was staring straight at him. On the morning of the first day of term, the sky had not yet fully brightened, and the towers of Hogwarts were only faintly outlined against the dim dawn. A cold bite hung in the air. Suddenly, a vast shadow cut through the thin clouds and swept toward the castle. It was an enormous raven, its wingspan as wide as a bus, a flying black fortress. Sargeras stood on the bird's broad back, the hem of his black robes snapping in the wind, yet he remained impossibly steady, as if standing on solid ground rather than a great raptor. He looked down at the slowly revealing silhouette of the castle and forced the turmoil in his chest aside. The sensation wasn't like riding a broomstick. It had something of a magic carpet about it. Loquetus gave a clear cry. The raven adjusted its wings, slowed, and dropped toward a secluded tower terrace on the west side of the castle. Sargeras slid down from its wing. Almost at once, Loquetus shrank to the size of an ordinary raven, fluttered to his shoulder, and began preening its ruffled feathers with its beak. Sargeras pushed open the terrace door. From the corridor came the muffled noise of students hurrying to classes and their excited chatter. He walked along a quiet stretch toward his office and, rounding a corner, nearly collided with Alastair Moody. The old Auror's wooden leg clacked on the stone. He wasn't carrying any books, and Sargeras noticed his wand was strapped to his left forearm, as though ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. "Sargeras." Moody stopped and greeted him in his habitual gruff tone, his magical eye fixed on Sargeras for a heartbeat, while the other eye flicked toward the end of the corridor, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Professor Moody." Sargeras inclined his head, voice even. Moody cut straight to it. "Read those wishy-washy Daily Prophet reports about the World Cup?" His normal eye was hard. "Good work. You dealt with scum like that with the harshest methods," Moody went on. "Hesitation gets you killed, and kindness just makes them think you can be bullied." His voice dropped to a colder edge. "I don't know what method you used, but it was clean and decisive. Ended it. Let every bastard hiding in the sewers with a mask on see what happens if they stick their heads up." His magical eye spun slowly, taking in the corridor. Sargeras listened without expression. Moody's hatred of dark wizards and approval of ruthless measures made Sargeras raise an eyebrow, but he did not argue. "Circumstances demanded it. Ensuring the safety of innocents was my priority," he said evenly, giving nothing away about the spell he had used. "Exactly. Ensuring safety." Moody thumped his walking stick against the floor with a dull metallic clang. "Sometimes you have to be ruthless, same as I handled that scumbag behind the rubbish bin yesterday." He spat the words out, as if recalling the event. "Too bad he got away, but there won't be a next time." His tone was fierce. Sargeras's gaze flickered. He had read the Daily Prophet's account of the so-called rubbish bin attack, and it differed in details from Moody's version. But faced with Moody's grim certainty and the telltale edge of post-battle adrenaline, Sargeras suspected the Auror's behavior came from years of hard service. "Vigilance is always appropriate, Professor Moody," he said calmly, though his approach to vigilance differed. "Of course, be vigilant." Moody's magical eye snapped back to him, probing. "You too, Sargeras. What you did at the World Cup undoubtedly foiled their plot. Those scumbags might come after you. Don't think Hogwarts is necessarily safe right now." He let that hang, letting his eye swivel to a nearby portrait. If you ask me, there's no such thing as a completely safe place in this world. Moodily warning, then he took another swig from his hip flask. All right, I have to go teach those kids their first class. Teach them some real things. With that, he clacked off down the corridor. Sargeras watched the stiff, determined figure go and then turned and walked quietly to his office. For the first lesson of the new term, Sargeras had planned a refresher on apparition for the 6th and 7th year students. In theory, every Hogwarts graduate should be able to apparate, but in practice, apparition was taught as a special training course, mainly for 6th years, with official instructors from the Ministry of Magic brought in to teach it. It wasn't part of the normal Hogwarts curriculum, it was an optional extra, and, absurdly to some, students who wanted the training had to pay an additional fee of 12 galleons. That made clear it wasn't treated as compulsory. Graduation from Hogwarts depended on OWLs and NWTs. An apparition license was a separate qualification, a kind of magic driver's license, that greatly expanded a wizard's freedom, but was illegal to perform without certification. While most students were still fretting over transfiguration minutiae or potion measurements, Sargeras had everything ready. Rather than teach in a classroom, he led a group of nervous, excited 6th and 7th years down the long corridor toward the dueling platform suspended in the open air. When they reached the platform, he had them spread out so there was ample space between them and sent the younger students who were watching to the stands. Today, and for the next 2 lessons, his voice rang across the arena, we will be practicing apparition and disapparition here. Apparition? A Ravenclaw girl's eyes lit up. Does that mean I won't have to rely on flu powder and the night bus anymore? What's there to look forward to? My mum says it feels awful, like being squeezed through a rubber tube. A Hufflepuff boy muttered to his companion, looking a little pale. This exam's got to be tough. I heard loads of people splinch, another student fretted. A ripple of anxious murmurs ran through the younger crowd, while those who hadn't had the chance to take the paid course watched the 6th and 7th years with hopeful, envious eyes. Chapter 3. D. Principle. Sargeras did not cut off their discussion. He simply waited calmly for the murmurs to die down before speaking again. Apparition and disapparition are like pushing a door open and closing it. Disapparition is stepping out. Apparition is stepping in. The whole magic is passing through that door. It is one of the most efficient and one of the most dangerous modes of travel in the wizarding world. It lets a wizard vanish from one place and instantly reappear at another chosen spot. As he spoke, he casually pointed into the air, and the dueling stone slab sank soundlessly into the ground. Its value is obvious. Whether you need to clear obstacles quickly, escape danger in a critical moment, or simply make everyday travel more convenient, once you master it, the scale of the world changes for you. He enumerated the uses in a steady, unemotional tone. Aurors use it to pursue dark wizards, healers at St. Mungo's use it to transport the injured urgently, and adventurers use it to flee danger. In my view, every adult wizard should learn it to cope with emergencies. Then his tone shifted, carrying a clear warning. But the other side of efficiency is risk. This is not a trivial spatial jump. It's the disassembly of your body in one location and its instantaneous reassembly elsewhere. Sargeras's voice carried across the arena. The process demands absolute concentration and total control of your magic. Even a moment of hesitation, fear, or distraction. He paused, letting his eyes sweep over the breathless faces, can have catastrophic consequences, what you commonly call splinching. The students swallowed and exchanged nervous glances. They had heard the grisly rumors about splinching during apparition tests. Sargeras stood in the center of the arena, looking at each young face. Apparition is usually forbidden inside Hogwarts Castle, but this is an exception. He tapped the ground lightly with his wand. A pale white glow spread from him, and the arena's protective enchantments sparked to life. Those protections greatly reduce the chance of splinching and can limit the harm if something goes wrong. But you must understand, this protection only works here. He paused to make sure they grasped the seriousness. Now, put your wands away. The first step of this lesson does not require them. Sargeras raised his wand and spread the mechanical mind charm over the students. Before you learn to apparate, you must understand the 3D principle. First, destination. He stated it clearly, took a step forward and vanished, only to appear again in the middle of the crowd a second later. You must form a precise, unwavering image of where you want to go. The more specific the better, not that room or that corner, but the center of that floor tile. The students listened thoughtfully, but he continued. Second, determination. He raised his voice and flickered to another spot among them. Let the will to reach your destination fill every part of you, even your hair. Picture yourself already standing there. You must eliminate all distractions, fear, doubt, even excitement. Everything must give way to unshakable determination. Finally, deliberation. He moved through the crowd again, his movements flickering with apparition, and then stopped to demonstrate the standard turning motion, calm, measured, and effortless. Not rushed, not reckless. A calm, steady mindset lets the magic naturally encompass your entire body and carry you from your original position. Throughout the whole process, your mind must be clear, your will firm, and your demeanor deliberate. Lose any one of those, and if any go wrong. He let the sentence hang and scanned the students, at best splinching, leaving part of yourself behind, at worst, death. Now try the first step. Pick a point 3 paces in front of you, visualize it exactly, feel it, then gather your determination and try to move. Nervous and awkward, the students copied him. Their attempts were hesitant and clumsy, faces tight with concentration. Subtle ripples of magic began to appear. Here and there, someone gave a small gasp, as if they'd slid a fraction of an inch, but most stayed put. Sagres walked among them, watching calmly and offering brief corrections. Your determination isn't firm enough, Miss Wilkes. You sound afraid. Don't worry, I won't let you splinch on my watch. Be clearer about your target, Mr. Ogg. Roughly there won't do. It must be precise. Relax, but don't be careless, Mr. Abbott. This is deliberation, not laziness. His voice carried authority and reassurance as he checked their progress. He finally stopped beside Ravenclaw's Cho Chang, who had her eyes squeezed shut, brows furrowed, trembling with effort. Apart from a gentle rustle of robes, she remained rooted. Think, your body doesn't need to push, Sagres said quietly next to her. Your will is the guide, not force. Understand? Understood. Where's your target? The small divot on that floor tile, Cho answered, cheeks flushed from concentrating. Good. Now it's not wanting to get there, but deciding you are already there. At the edge of the circle, a Hufflepuff boy turned halfway as if wound up, every movement stiff. Fear comes from the unknown, Sagres told them. The idea of being broken down and reassembled is unfamiliar to beginners. But that's precisely why the protective magic is in place, to keep that unknown risk within acceptable bounds. Trust it. Trust your will. He returned to the center. Keep trying. Everyone. This time, don't think about moving. Think about arriving. They tried again. This time, many more showed signs of magical response. Several students gasped as a strong, dizzying pull gripped them. Their bodies felt momentarily lighter, as if they'd almost been drawn away, yet their feet landed back on the same stone slab. Professor, a Gryffindor called out excitedly. I just slid a bit. That's the magic responding to you, Sagres said with a nod. Remember that feeling. When you can fully control it, you'll be close to success. Chapter 300, Alchemy Puppet Workshop. As the class drew to a close, most of the students, still unable to apparate successfully, no longer wore the fear that had marked them at the start. It had been replaced by a tired, excited focus. They had all felt that strange, wonderful sensation that seemed to open a door to another world. Apparition isn't achieved overnight, Sagres said in his final summary. It takes extensive practice and a deeper mastery of your own magic. Today's lesson was meant to help you understand the principle and feel the process. Until you have full control, never try this on your own outside of class, unless you want to leave a permanent memento in the form of a missing body part. He scanned the room to make sure everyone heard the warning. Class dismissed. Students filed off the dueling platform in 2s and 3s, still talking animatedly about the experience. Many of them kept miming the strange tug of magic with wide eyes and half-laughs. In the staff room, the afternoon sun poured through stained glass, warming the aged wood and filling the air with the smell of tea and old parchment. Professors without classes were taking a brief respite. Professor Bathsheba Babbling, the ancient runes expert, set down her teacup with a soft sigh and frowned at a stack of test papers in her lap. Another batch of failures? Professor McGonagall asked, looking up from her own pile of papers. Worse than that, Minerva. Bathsheba rubbed her temples. They can memorize the symbols and basic meanings, but they have no idea how the runes actually function in practice. They don't grasp that these symbols are a language of power. She tapped the top paper, pointing to a badly drawn rune. Look at this. A secondary rune that means decomposition was accidentally introduced into a protective sequence. If that student did this in a real alchemy experiment, blowing up half the classroom would be the best-case scenario. Sargeras happened to pass the bookshelf, holding a cup of black coffee. Bathsheba called after him as if an idea had just occurred to her. Professor Greengrass, please wait. He stopped and looked over. Professor Babbling? I heard. You are very good at creating practical teaching environments, she said carefully, referring to the illusions he used on the dueling platform. Sargeras nodded. Bathsheba leaned forward, suddenly eager. Would you construct a scenario? One that lets the students truly feel how runes work, how they're the source of power and the locus of vulnerability? Lectures and tests won't be enough. Theory must be paired with practice. Ancient runes are almost an engineering language. They need to see the consequences of incorrectly carved runes and the effects of correct sequences. Sargeras swirled his coffee and considered. A practical venue with ancient runes as the core mechanism, he repeated slowly. Not just identification, but analysis and application, forcing students to observe rune effects in a dynamic environment and use that knowledge to solve problems. Exactly, Bathsheba's face lit up. If rune knowledge can be integrated into combat or puzzle solving, danger is the best teacher, even if simulated. It will make them remember. Sargeras nodded. An out-of-control ancient alchemy laboratory would be ideal. The power source, energy transmission, and defensive barriers of alchemical constructs all rely on precise rune sequences. Their weaknesses usually show up as unstable rune structures. This fit his teaching philosophy perfectly. Precision, efficiency, and understanding rather than brute force. Bathsheba smiled. I'll provide typical rune sequences and common incorrect combinations for reference. This will be far more useful than marking another 100 terrible tests. Very good, Sargeras said. I'll design the scenario and the constructs. The focus will be observation, analysis, and precise strikes. And so the concept of the Alchemy Construct Workshop was born from that brief staff room conversation. One professor's worry about student comprehension and another's belief in practical instruction turned into a training instance to improve ancient runes understanding and practical combat skills. Over the next few days, Sargeras poured every spare hour into building the instance. He had experience in this area, so progress was swift. Instance name, Alchemy Construct Workshop. Instance background. The simulation recreates an ancient alchemy laboratory called the Ixos Workshop, where the core energy source has gone out of control, causing defenses and experimental constructs to run amok. Level settings, 1 outer corridor, newbie guide. Constructs, patroller, basic melee construct, moves slowly, attacks with metal arm swings. Weak point, an incompletely covered blue rune plate on its back. A precisely aimed stupefy or an obstacle curse can paralyze it. Rune sentry, wall-mounted unit that fires low-power magical missiles. Weakness, a constantly flashing red rune above its firing port. An Expelliarmus or a precise freezing charm can temporarily disable it. Environmental mechanism, harmless steam occasionally sprays from the floor, obstructing vision. 2. Construct Production Workshop constructs. Heavy guard, large, thickly armored construct that charges. Weakness, a yellow rune at its leg joints. Repeated attacks can unbalance it and knock it down, exposing its energy core on the back. Swift Cutter, small, agile construct with spinning blades. Its movement is unpredictable, but at high speeds the green rune on its chest flashes, anticipate its path, and use trap-like magic. Environmental mechanism. Overhead cranes move intermittently and can become obstacles or cover. Stepping into the central energy pool causes continuous damage. 3. Core Furnace Constructs. Elemental Weaver. Fires small fireballs or ice shards. Its elemental attacks spring from different runes, fire water, on its arms, using opposing basic elemental spells. Aguamenti, Incendio, on its arms can cause an energy backflow and temporarily paralyze it. Repair Unit, non-offensive construct that attempts to repair damaged constructs. Must be prioritized. Weakness, a constantly rotating white rune on its head, very fragile but well protected. Environmental mechanism, the furnace is unstable and periodically releases energy pulses that briefly stun all targets, including students. Interactive energy disruptors in the area can be used correctly to temporarily shut down the furnace. 4. Energy Core, Ultimate Challenge, Boss Mechanism. The boss is not a single construct but a giant rune core. It periodically summons earlier constructs and releases area of effect magic blasts. Cracking Method. The rune core is untouchable in its normal state. 4 resonance pillars surround it. Students must observe the changing rune sequences on the core and quickly inscribe corresponding opposite attribute runes on the pillars. When the 4 pillars are activated in the correct sequence, the core briefly overloads. This is when they can focus fire on it. Failure conditions. Incorrect rune engravings or running out of time cause the matrix to release a massive shockwave. The number and strength of summoned constructs increase over time. Because the instance had clear teaching goals and interdisciplinary support, it was more than simple combat training. The dueling platform's safety magic still prevented truly fatal injuries. If a student's life was in danger, they would be automatically teleported out, and the run would count as a failure. Scoring followed the usual pattern: completion speed, damage taken, accuracy of rune selection, spell precision, and so on. Rewards included house points, dueling points, magical skill experience, and small alchemical items. Sagres also tweaked construct combinations, numbers, and even weak point locations at random, ensuring replayability and challenge. A few days later, Sagres activated the Alchemy Construct Workshop on the dueling platform. He addressed the assembled, eager students. At Professor Babbling's request, this instance is not merely to train your combat reactions, he said. It's to help you intuitively understand that ancient runes aren't rigid marks in a book, but active elements that form the source of power and the fatal weaknesses of magical creations. Professor Babbling hopes you'll learn how to truly read magic. The stone slabs of the dueling platform hummed as Sagres tapped his wand. The empty arena seemed to ripple, and a dilapidated, massive alchemy workshop began to coalesce. Cold metal pipes snaked along walls and ceiling, sighing faint steam. Glowing crystals, unfinished rune plates, and strange tools clustered on workbenches. The air smelled of hot metal and a faint, unpleasant chemical tang. From somewhere deep in the simulacrum came the grinding of gears and the low thrum of an energy core. Sagres turned to the wide-eyed students. "Welcome to the Alchemy Construct Workshop," his voice echoed. "This simulated environment is based on an ancient workshop that has run wild. Your opponents today are not each other." With a flick of his wand, pairs of eyes lit up in the shadowed recesses. Metal joints clacked. Constructs driven by rune cores slid from the gloom, varied in shape, their shells etched with ancient runes and pulsing with different magical signatures. "Ancient alchemy constructs," Sagres continued. "They have no life and no fear. They follow their built-in rune instructions and will eliminate unauthorized intruders." "Intruders?" a student whispered. Sagres nodded. "That'll be you." The students held their breath, watching the mechanical creations with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Each construct has a unique mode of action and an energy core. The core is usually covered by armor, but its operation leaves external traces, glowing runes or attack patterns. Your goal isn't brute force destruction, though that's an option. It's inefficient and risky. Observe, analyze, and find the weaknesses. Then use the most precise spells to sever their power or destroy their control runes. He stepped back into the shifting light and shadow of the workshop. Locatus darted to a hanging beam above the spectators, dark eyes surveying the scene below, ready to watch the controlled chaos unfold. "Friendly reminder," Sagres added, "reckless bombardment will waste your magic and may trigger their more dangerous defensive or counterattack modes."